Begin the session.
Gee, I remember when these meetings used to start on time.
The chairman is already giving us grief, which is his
water.
Yeah. Something about the chairman can't hold his drinks.
The chairman is like, he gets so excited when he gets here with TAC.
That's right.
You know.
So I would like to welcome you all to our spring, it's still spring TAC meeting, although virtually summer. We do have a very full agenda. This is our first attempt at trying to figure out a more optimal way of fitting in our 7 different working groups. We'll have long presentations as well as short presentations interspersed. So a lot going on, too, having sat in on some of the working groups. I know that you're working very hard, and the sub-working groups and the sub-working groups in some cases, so we're really moving forward with a lot of important areas. I would like to make special note of the fact that we're honored to have the chairman of the FCC with us. So, Tom, welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
We also have a few people to recognize, and I failed to note exactly where Lisa is sitting. Lisa Guest
right.
is there. He is. I knew I'd seen you earlier, but I forgot where you were sitting. It's one of the challenges, even that the chairman was pointing this out. Our table seems to be getting longer and longer, so finding people is more and more challenging. But Lisa is the Vice President of System Engineering for the Americas for Juniper Networks, and we're delighted to have you here. She's replacing Hans-Jürgen Schmidtke, who I can never pronounce his last name. We're also pleased to have a brand new member of the TAC who has been on the TAC for a very long time, but there was an intervening point where you may not have known that he wasn't on the TAC, but we welcome back Jeff Mendenhall, who is here representing Gates Air. Formerly he was with Harris, but Harris, as with many companies, has changed and transformed itself and removed things and added things, and so we're delighted to have Jeff officially back at the table with us again. We also have 2 interns to recognize today who, in fact, are very involved with us. So Andrea, and I'll probably get this wrong too, Alexandra Ackeson. She's a student at the University of Colorado Boulder, so I knew that Dale would be cheering you on.
Well, actually, we got her by way of Dale.
Okay, great. And Andrew Kim, who is a senior at Princeton University. And Andrew, raise your hand, right there, sitting next to Alexandra. But we're delighted to have you here, and I'm sure the FCC is delighted to have you here for the summer. With that, if we could make the quick once around the table, introducing one another, and why don't you start?
Okay, Walter Johnston with the Office of Engineering and Technology at the FCC.
Dale Hatfield, University of Colorado.
Jeff Forrester with Intel.
Dick Green, Liberty Global.
Lisa Guest, Juniper Networks.
Teresa Hennessy, Comcast.
Mark Pritchard, ATSC.
Steve Lanning, Viasat.
Shahid Ahmed, Accenture.
David Young, Verizon.
Greg Lappin, ARRL.
Lynn Merrill, NTCA.
Jack Nishelski from Qualcomm.
Brian Markwalter, Consumer Electronics Association.
Ramani Pandurangan from Exo Communications.
Brian Daly, AT&T.
Paul Steinberg, Motorola.
Lynn Claudy, NAB.
Nomi Bergman with Bright House.
Adam Drobot, Open Tech Works.
Russell Jurek with Cisco.
Mark Bayless with Visual Inc.
Kevin Sparks, Alcatel Lucent.
John Barnhill with Gen Band.
Marvin Sergey, Special Government Employee.
David Tenenhouse, VMware.
John Dobbins, Earthlink.
Jeff Mendenhall, Gates Air, the successor to Harris Broadcast.
Marty Cooper, Dana LLC.
Rangam Subramanian, NTIA.
Pierre DeFree, Silicon Flatiron Center, here as a special government employee.
Julie Knapp with the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology.
Tom Wheeler, retired chairman of the TAC.
Chairman Emeritus is more appropriate on that. But again, we're delighted to have you here. And I am Dennis Roberson from Illinois Institute of Technology and the Wireless Network and Communications Research Center. Now, we do have the potential of having it even beyond the large number of TAC members who are here, others who are on the phone. Do we have any on the phone who would, if so, please identify yourselves?
Mark Gornberg with Zeta Venture Partners.
Greetings, Mark.
Brian Fons from Google. Brian Fons from the National Emergency Number Association.
Scott Jordan, FCC Chief Technologist.
Bob Miller representing Jesse Russell Inc. Networks.
And Milo Medine from Google.
Who was the last person? Milo. Okay, hi, Milo.
Hi.
Well, we really do have a full group. Adding those on the phone, and I'm actually quite sure this is the largest group that we have ever had together. So that's terrific. And it does bespeak the interest in the things that we're undertaking. So, Mr. Chairman, did you have anything you wish to say beyond your emeritus status to open us up?
I'm anxious to hear the report.
And so am I. So, Brian Daly, you are on mobile device theft prevention, our first, and in this case, long, but hopefully not too long, representation of the great work that you've been doing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to present the report of the Mobile Device Theft Prevention Working Group. And if we could have the slides, please. Today, we'd like to talk about the mission statement, the further request for advice received by the FCC after the initial meeting of the TAC in April, and talk about some of the interim findings that the group has found. Just for a refresher, the working group participants are listed here. I have a co-chair, Rob Kubik, who was unable to attend today from Samsung, and a number of participants from the TAC are engaged in the working group and very contributing very heavily to the work. Just a refresher on our mission. The emphasis of our work this year is on longer-term initiatives to combat more sophisticated theft scenarios and looking at recommendations on next-generation anti-theft procedures. We're also giving consideration to extending theft prevention mechanisms to other classes of devices beyond smartphones and providing an assessment of progress made in the area of device theft prevention as some of the recommendations have been applied. After the initial TAC meeting this year, the chairman has requested the working group consider additional tasks and specifically to focus on a couple of tasks. The first was on-device mobile theft prevention features template. The second is hardening device identifiers, and the third is the database issue. The tasks 1 and 2, we provided an interim report on May 1st, and I'll be giving a readout of that report today. The third task on the database is scheduled for October 1st, and the working group will continue to make progress in that area. Some of the interim findings to date. On April 30th, the CTIA did release a national mobile security and privacy survey. And out of this survey, we found that 61% of Americans who own smartphones and tablets do use PINs and passwords. And this represents an increase of more than 20% from 2012. CTIA cites one of the reasons for this as being the collective wireless industry's consumer education activities, as well as the initiatives developed by individual companies. We are planning to have a recurring survey effort for continuing monitoring of improvements. It's also, there was data released that shows there is progress to prevent mobile device theft being made. And out of New York State, we see that we're finding thefts down 22% San Francisco, 16% in New York City, and worldwide we're seeing thefts down 40% in London. The working group has noted we should attempt to obtain data from other jurisdictions besides those that are cited here to see if this progress is universal throughout other jurisdictions. Some of the efforts already in progress, the mobile OS providers and manufacturers are in various stages of deploying anti-theft solutions, and this is based off of voluntary commitments as well as state laws. California requires that any smartphone that is manufactured on or after July 1st of this year and sold in California after that date to include solutions that, at the time of sale, to be provided by the manufacturer or operating system provider, can render the essential features of the smartphone inoperable to an unauthorized user when the smartphone is not in the possession of that authorized user. And the smartphone shall, during initial device setup process, prompt an authorized user to enable the technological solution. Now, it's important to note that while the California law mandates technological solutions, these solutions will be deployed not only in the state of California, but nationwide under the CTIA voluntary commitment. What the working group did was to take a look at the different aspects of the CTIA commitment, the California law, and a similar law that was passed in Minnesota, and looked at the various anti-theft capabilities that those commitments and laws provided, and developed what we have here as the working group view of those various aspects of those laws. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but just the highlights. The July 2015 certainly is the date required in California, Minnesota, as well as the CTI commitment, and the working group views the July 2015 as being the required date as well overall. Other aspects, no cost to consumers, and shall include a technological solution at the time of sale that, once initiated and successfully communicated to the smartphone, provides remote wipe, allow the authorized user to render essential features inoperable to unauthorized users once communicated. These were viewed as being required as far as the working group view as well. To further go on, we looked at other aspects of these laws and commitments, including the ability to continue to function for 911 calls, which the working group view felt was required, even though the Minnesota law is silent on that aspect, and the California law mentions it's not incompatible with 911. Other aspects are the ability to prevent reactivation by unauthorized users, including factory reset, restoring user data to the extent feasible, and the reverse inoperability if recovered by the authorized user. Again, these are in the CTIA commitment. Some of these aspects are required. In the California law, some of these are required. The Minnesota law is silent, but the working group view is these aspects should be required. Looking at the automatic on-device setup California law requirement, for consumers during the initial device setup, the authorized user is prompted to enable the anti-theft technological solution. It also requires consumer choice, that the consumer should have the option to affirmatively elect to disable the protection, but it has to be clear to the consumer that the function they are electing to disable is intended to prevent the unauthorized use of the device. And unauthorized use of the smartphone, a user of the smartphone may affirmatively elect to disable or opt out of the enabling technological solution at any time. The availability of these on-device anti-theft features on all smartphones is expected to increase after the effective date of both the CTIA voluntary commitment and the California and Minnesota laws. As a working group, we recommend that the industry perform a study after July 2015 to gather data on consumer usage and trends. And in particular, we need to look at and determine when users are prompted to activate it, whether the uptake for these features continues to improve. And the CTIA report, which I mentioned, is evidence that consumers are increasing their use of anti-theft features on smartphones. And there's many reasons that the CTIA has cited as reason for increasing these consumer use of these solutions. First is the smartphone anti-voluntary commitment, which is signed both by network operators, manufacturers, and operating system companies to help protect consumers while recognizing the need to maintain flexibility so they may constantly innovate and adapt. The implementation of international databases is out there to help prevent reactivating of stolen devices. Smartphone manufacturers notify and prompt users via smartphones upon activation or soon after its capability of being locked and secured from unauthorized access by setting a PIN or password. The manufacturers are providing information on how to secure and lock new smartphones in-box and or through quick start menus or user guides, and the development and promoting a list of apps for various mobile operating systems that would remotely lock, erase, or track devices, and finally created a video public service announcements and social media outreach efforts that directing users to anti-theft resources. Consumer education has been a big part of the recommendations of the working group, and the working group does encourage the FCC to create a website consumer education portal to inform consumers about anti-theft initiatives and legislation industry is committed to support, and provide links to each of the carrier, smartphone manufacturer, and OS provider web pages that describe their anti-theft features after July of 2015, and the consumer response actions in the event their device is lost or stolen. For example, if it were a result of a criminal act, the consumers should first contact local law enforcement to report the crime. Consumers should contact their carrier to cancel service and blacklist the device. And finally, smartphone manufacturer and OS providers may be contacted regarding their solutions. And working with industry, the FCC should look towards additional consumer education opportunities. Moving to the hardening of the IMEI, IMEI reprogramming doesn't appear to be the significant issue today that it once was. There's been an improvement in overall IMEI security levels, and this has been acknowledged by the European Commission. In their study from 2009 to 2010, they found a 58% decrease in allegations of IMEI tampering, 45% decrease in impacted manufacturers, with 83% of compromised device models pertaining to just 2 manufacturers which the GSMA has worked with. We need to look at more recent data to confirm this trend is continuing. The industry doesn't recommend a replacement hardware identifier because changing the identifier could be drastic in terms of global standards and best practices impacts, the development and deployment with impacts to the entire network, handsets, fraud and operating systems, and roaming. The IMEI is defined in global 3GPP standards and provides capabilities needed, and further enhancements are being explored. The GSM Association's handset security technical principles contain detailed technical measures designed to increase the security of IMEI against unauthorized change, and increasing security of IMEI implementations has been an area of focus for GSMA over the past 10 years. Centralized reporting and correction of newly identified IMEI security weaknesses to improve device security level is in place. The GSMA and the world's leading mobile device manufacturers have established a formal process. Reports are referred to the relevant manufacturers, investigated, and responded to within 42 days. And that this report would contain details of proposed remedial action and dates for which new equipment with new security measures will be introduced. Most of the world's largest handset manufacturers have formally signed up to support the GSMA initiatives, and the practical coverage of the GSMA solution still needs to be validated. The security group, device security group under the GSMA is revisiting the entire IMEI security topic in 2015, as it's already identified this as being a priority for this year and next, and will work with, at a minimum, involve a review of the technical design principles and reporting and correction process. And the GSMA's North American Regional Interest Group is going to provide North American specific concerns, and as a result of that study, ADIS and or 3GPP may be involved if standardization efforts are required. The working group has come up with two preliminary recommendations. The first is a deeper investigation by industry into the causal factors for increase in consumer use of on-device solutions that could be used for determining how to optimize further efforts to incentivize greater consumer use of anti-theft features, if necessary. And the recommended completion of this study be the end of year 2015. We also recommend that an industry-led investigation into whether the increased availability of the anti-theft functionality on new smartphones, as well as the upcoming initial device setup prompts that will be required by California legislation after July 2015, have the effect of further increasing consumer use of these features. And such a study should be undertaken after the July 1st, 2015 date to allow for a sufficient number of devices with these features to have been placed into circulation. Some further anticipated recommendations that we'll be investigating include continued studies to determine whether those implementations post-July have the desired effect on mobile theft, and it refers to the planned recurring survey effort for continuing monitoring of improvements, and the FCC should work with CTIA in defining that survey. And better tracking of actual phones stolen to be investigated as part of the Working Group Task 3 deliverable. The FCC should develop a voluntary framework for a set of on-device capabilities to guide industry based on the Working Group View column of the Best Practices Template Comparison of Anti-Theft Tools that was presented earlier in this presentation. The FCC should work with industry on developing effective outreach initiatives to educate the consumer and identify key technological areas where the FCC should seek further information from industry. And some of those areas, such as IMEI, requirements and use of databases, and future theft prevention opportunities have been noted. So the plan for the second half is to make additional progress, further explore tasks 1 and 2, taking a deeper investigation by industry into the causal factors for the increase in consumer use of these features, and address task 3, the database, and continue with the 2015 mission, including exploring next-generation anti-theft features, more focused analysis on the overall theft ecosystem, further recommendations on improved reporting mechanisms, and law enforcement engagement. So that completes the presentation. Within the backup material, there's just further definition of the tasks that we were handed in April.
Clearly, this is an enormously challenging area, and I know that the team has been working on this with great rigor and with a lot of interest and expressions of interest from the FCC, including your report out in May. Did you want to talk now, or
I'll
let the group, please?
Let's let the group, then I'll talk.
Okay, you can have the last word after the conversation. All right. In our normal habit as a TAC, if you have an expression of or a question that you have, please raise your card. Pierre, is it?
Okay, thanks. Thank you. This is a very impressive piece of work, and you guys have been working on insane deadlines as well. So I'm very, very impressed. Just a couple of questions on the studies that you mentioned. The first one is just a nit. On slide 11, you say the industry would perform a study, but in the document that you also circulated to the TAC, it says that the FCC commissioned a study. So I wasn't sure which one it was. But that's just an editing thing. A slightly deeper question is on slide 16. there are two studies that you mentioned there, one into the causal factors for the increase in consumer use, and the other is into the availability of anti-theft functionality. The one says investigation by industry, the other one says industry-led. It strikes me that there are other stakeholders that it would be good to involve as well. There is one consumer advocacy group on the working group with CDT. There may well be others. I think it might be welcome, if possible, to involve consumer advocates, organizations in at least the framing of the questions that will be studied. And the last one on slide 17, I'm sure that it's necessary to do outreach to educate consumers. Something that I just learned today was they may not be the only people that need to be educated. So, for example, what about outreach to the 18,000 law enforcement agencies to educate them?
Yeah, the law enforcement education outreach is one of the things that we noted in last year's report, and that certainly is a crucial part of this. As we looked into this year, certainly to build upon last year's report, we believe further outreach to educate the consumer, especially as these new features are being rolled out, was an important one. But certainly that doesn't minimize the need for the outreach to law enforcement as well.
So a couple quick, by the way. Hello. I want to echo Pierre's comments. Extremely good work in terms of what you guys have done, Brian, you and your team. A couple quick questions. It may just be a misunderstanding on my part. Is this an SP implementation? What happens? Does it create a channel for phones to be exported outside the U.S. where they won't have the same coverage, or they, somebody could steal a phone, turn it off, take it out? How is it being enforced, I guess, is the question. Second part, IMEI hardening. You're basically closing a door. Hackers will find another door. The good thing is IMEI hardening, as you said, has gotten not to be as big of a problem. I assume GSMA and others are going to monitor whether that picks up once you implement California, Minnesota, and the requirements that you've put in place. So just a quick question there on, what are your thoughts? Is that going to create another, either a point to go back to the IMEI door for hackers, and then the export issue in terms of creating a channel for stolen phones?
As far as the export issue, that's one of the things we tried to investigate last year, is where these devices were ultimately ending up once they were stolen. And while there was some initial data that supported the export, it wasn't conclusive in the end. But solutions such as the database, which is our third task to look at this year, is meant to try to close that door as best as possible, and we'll be further studying that as we go through into the October deliverable. Regarding the IMEI hardening, certainly the GSM Association considers that to be a priority topic, and we'll continue to look at that. And I think under the GSMA security group in general, I think as that door is closed and others are opened, we certainly need to identify those and make sure those get closed as well.
Other questions or comments? Over the phone, are there questions, comments from you all out there in cyberspace?
Thank you. This is Brian Fonts. Quick question, Brian, and thank you and your committee for all the work you're doing on this. I think the applicability to a broader context, and I appreciate the earlier comment on law enforcement, was particularly interesting from my vantage point. And I just want to hear from you in terms of the applicability of the work done here to what will eventually be FirstNet mobile devices. And I believe in reading this and looking over what you have presented, there'd be substantial applicability as we move into a eventually FirstNet environment for securing those devices as well. Am I assuming correctly?
Yes, you are, Brian. As FirstNet and the broadband public safety network is built off LTE technology, these capabilities would be applicable to those devices as well, as I would see it, and other anti-theft measures such as IMEI databases.
Excellent. Thank you.
I note that the continue to function for 911 calls requirement seems like it may be inconsistent with the direction that the FCC is moving with respect to non-service activated phones and 911, and perhaps requirements are being developed here that are inconsistent with where the industry is going, and I wanted to see if this has come up in the discussions.
It hasn't, although the applicability of the current discussion for non-service initialized devices as it would apply to locked devices, we certainly need to address that as we see where the industry goes with that.
Back to cyberspace. Any other questions or comments, since we have a large group out there today? Hearing none, certainly I knew from observing the rapidity at which notes were being taken that our chairman emeritus would certainly have something to say, and has expressed a keen interest in this area, as well he should. So,
well,
please.
Thank you, Dennis. And Brian, to you and your whole team, thank you very much. I agree. This was a major undertaking. This is part 2 of a major undertaking. I asked you to do a Mission Impossible last year, and you produced the largest and most comprehensive analysis of the issue that I think has ever been produced anywhere in the world, that formed a firm foundation for all of us to deal with this. And then, the punishment for doing a good job is to get asked to do more. And so I did, and also on an expedited time frame. And I appreciate the way that you and your entire team have really been busting tail on this. You have my 2 favorite things, one moving with warp speed, and the other actionable recommendations, an interesting concept that I remember hearing around this table previously. And we will not ignore those actionable recommendations. I'm this afternoon going to communicate with CTIA and ask them to incorporate the opt-out recommendation into their voluntary code, to work with us on education programs, and to help as you go to phase 3 of this in dealing with the database issue. And I hear rumors that there may be some North American solutions or approaches to database which could be leading the world, and that's terrific. The great thing about this group is that this is the multi-stakeholder process at work. And so when you all produce these kinds of thoughtful, actionable recommendations, we need to step and take notice. And we have and will continue, and we're grateful to all of you. And Mr. Chairman, Dennis, thank you for your efforts on this, because, this is not just sitting around talking about it. This is producing results. So thank you very much.
So thank you for being here, and by being here expressing your strong interest in certainly this working group, but I think all of the actions of the TAC in your last comment around the multi-stakeholder nature of this group. As usual, there there's lots more to be done. You referenced this already, Mr. Chairman, with the no good deed shall go unpunished. But there is a great deal. This is a hard problem. There's enormous progress that's been made, but there's an enormous distance to be passed through in the future to get to the promised land. And I know that's the goal that you and the team have, and having observed your work, there's a lot of energy and a lot of diversity in the perspectives. And that is good, because that is what a multi-stakeholder group is all about. A lot of perspectives and a lot of good work that has been done, in some cases good work that's been done by other entities that needs to be either used, questioned, amplified, modified, moved forward to the next level, and that's the challenge for this group, without in any way putting down the work that others have done. I think there is still an enormous amount of actionable recommendation work that will be before this group as we go through in the really hard problems, including really nailing down where these phones actually go. This has been one of my drum beats from even before this became a topic at the TAC itself. But it's still one of those hard nuts. So if any member of the TAC has inside knowledge of where the phones have gone, these
don't admit it.
Privately, you can let me know. It's been an interesting process, I think, for all of us. I have one of my favorite homeless people who's probably given me more insight on this topic than anyone else, at least at the front end of that process. But I think searching, and I even mentioned this, from the point of searching far and wide to come to a full and rich understanding of how this process works, and that's the best and most effective way to be able to respond and resolve the issue. We also have the point that's already been made with the large number, I guess, Pierre, the large number of entities that need to be engaged from the law enforcement community, and that's an enormous challenge, and maybe Paul seems to know something about that group, so maybe he can be of assistance in making that bridge as well. But
there is a technology provider, not as a recipient.
Thanks for that clarification, Paul. So we again, thank you so much, Brian, and through you, thank you to the rest of the team who's been working so hard on this. And thank you again for yes, I understand. Thank you for being with us, and I do understand that there may be one or two other things going on today.
We'll see. Okay. Thanks, Dennis.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you. All right, moving on, and we're people who reviewed the volume of your materials said there wasn't a chance that we would be on schedule even after the first item, but we're ahead of schedule. So, and let that be noted, Mr. Chairman. So, onward to our next topic, which is Paul Steinberg and cybersecurity, a topic that our chairman also has enormous interest in. And please move forth.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. So this is the first of the short form versions, I guess, which is not something I'm noted for, so we'll see how this goes. If I could have the slides, please. So what we'll do is we'll take us through, what we've actually provided is actually an executive summary at the beginning, which is roughly about a half a dozen slides. And then what we've divided our team into is basically 3 working groups, which coincide pretty rigorously with the FCC requests. And so I'll go through basically a brief status of each of those working groups with the help of my colleague Shahid, and Romani, who's chairing one of the working groups, is here as well. And then if you want to dig into more detail about where we're at with each of those groups, that's the balance of the presentation. So hopefully this will get us where we need to go. All the groups are pretty much following the same basic pattern, kind of first half of the year up until now in a discovery phase, second half developing and finding and specifically pointing to where the gaps and the places where impact we believe can be met, and then finally polishing that with a set of actionable recommendations to apply toward those gaps. Certainly when I get through, we'd welcome any feedback from the TAC in terms of what I'm really going to go through is the plan, not the output, obviously, in the time we have. So the group is actually taking shape very, very nicely. We've attracted quite a few people, both members of the TAC and folks that are outside of the TAC, bringing the expertise that we think we need. Just worthy of note here, I already mentioned Shahid and Ramani. Jeff and Ahmed are our FCC liaisons who've been actively steering us and helping us through the process. Starting with the first group, which was on smartphone security. It's a bit of a recast from last year. Martin Dahle from AT&T and Brian's organization actually chairs that group, ably assisted by Renato Dellatore from Verizon Wireless. So the scope here and the key direction is how can we do something to secure the mobile device and make it tractable for mere mortals. So after we get through preventing its theft or being able to isolate its theft down, are there ways that we can make it more cyber secure during operations? Because I think I saw a statistic, the most prevalent platform to be targeted in industry has clearly been computers. Last year there were 300 million roughly computers of all kinds sold. Laptops, desktops, the works. There were 1.2 billion smartphones sold last year, so 4x. So little doubt what the platform of target will be, and increasingly commerce and daily lives are executed on those platforms. So it's a big deal. So the approach is actually three-step that the group is taking. The first step is just looking at some low-hanging fruit. And if you recall last year, the idea was, is there some way we can take and automate the 10 questions, the immutable 10 questions that are published on the FCC webpage, and put those into practice so that a user can, if answering those questions, their phone can be configured, so they don't have to worry about firewalls and all the complicated permutations. So the first step is, can we at least hook them into those questions viscerally during the activation phase or at an early point in time so that they at least see them. They don't have to go and seek them out. I was interested in listening to Brian's report, and he's got a clear scale point, speaking about the California activation spot, where that would seem to be a very logical point to begin to hook people and point them at, if you want to secure your phone in operation, here would be a first place to go. So that's something we can take on board. Second deliverable would be a wizard type approach, to automate the process so that we can go through and, again, with the basic questions, I'm not sure if we can make them immutable for all time's sake, provide some configuration of the platform. And then the third phase, which is the real FCC request, is can we provide some generic requirements for third-party checking software or basically intrinsic checking software that can actually monitor and verify the veracity of the smartphone in operation. So roughly what you'll see on the next slide is the breakdown of the deliverables. A couple work products already well in flight. Draft is ongoing for the low-hanging fruit. Draft is also ongoing and out for circulation for the wizard approach. The generic requirements for the active security checker, what we've done is we've reached to a number of providers of that technology and industry today, some recommended by the FCC, some that we know, to try to bring them on board as they're clearly the experts and that's the business that they're applying into. The one request I had for the group for the commission was we're a little bit light and have not been very successful in attracting support from the mobile operating system providers. And we feel that they're a pretty important component in the food chain here to ultimately crack this nut. Second group, this is around consumer Internet of Things security. And similar pattern as to what I described before. Group is going through an investigation process now. Just completed what we call an industry landscape survey. And as you might imagine, these are not new topics and these are not things that haven't been considered in some ways by various facets of the industry. Recent series of threats in the ICT space in particular have significantly heightened the awareness about and the vulnerability of critical infrastructure or heavy industry for this specific space. So first mapping the landscape of who's got an oar in the water here and who's actually got a stake in this process and is making progress. Then the next step is the gap assessment. Where are the holes likely to be in the process? Where is it likely that the FCC can actually make the most impact? And then finally, of course, in the last piece of the year, the development of the specific recommendations for what we'd like the FCC to do. What we expect to get done with the next report, Q3 report, have the gaps obviously finalized and have a beginning at the recommendations for this body and or the FCC to react to see if we're on the right path or if we're not. And so then just on the next slide, we kind of quantify those specific deliverables. And as I mentioned, the landscape survey is out for review now. FCC should see that submitted, if not by the end of this week, certainly by next week. Group actually just wanted to also clarify The focus here is on consumer IoT, not ICT and not industrial. I think the implication is that as we all worry a lot about the industrial control systems and the industrial control technologies and the implications of that. But right now the focus of the group is on consumer and is on resilience and not so much the privacy issue. So if that's an incorrect angle, that's something we need a quick redirection on. And I forgot to mention, that group is actually chaired by George Popovich and Tom McGarry from New Star. So they're making excellent progress. The final group is around securing the software-defined network, and increasingly software-defined everything, clearly significant part. Some days I wonder who's going to ultimately build the hardware in these networks, but that's a whole different question. But clearly, the more you can make the function of a piece of hardware defined in software, the more vulnerable it is to being attacked and hacked for nefarious reasons. So I think this is a very good point that's been raised. I think the FCC pointed us to some parallels around DNS and BGN, or BGP work that has been done in the past, and so that was a very good place to start. So the scope and direction, Ramani leads this group, and Ramani, please jump in if I botch anything or miss anything. Very similar. The exploration process, looking for the gaps, looking for the statements of, looking for the positions in industry of, best practices that are already there. We've seen a lot of press within the last, 6 months to 9 months of a lot of significant entities leaning very heavily into virtualizing and defining their network in a software way. So that is a very clear indication that this is not just technology looking for a home. So, the key thing will be the exploration, again, of the key gaps and best practices that perhaps the FCC can emphasize or drive harder on, and then the actionable recommendations in the second half of the year. And you'll see, I think that the expected output of this group is specifically a white paper, not a series of publications. And then the deliverables, again, September, work in progress right now on the gap assessment, consultation with industry practitioners, et cetera, final delivery and the recommendations at the end of the year. And with that, I think Shahid or Ramani, if I missed anything, please chime in, but that concludes our short report, sir. Yeah, sure, Admiral.
And I apologize, I didn't anticipate the dispatch with which the TAC would be going through the elements here. But on the software-defined networking piece, we're concerned with the characterization of the work as to we're working on user awareness of the challenges. When it doesn't seem like that's, at least in the questions that we provided to the TAC, the focus really wasn't on users. Users need to be protected from the anticipated increased use to a control plane which would now be exposed to a wide variety of additional attack vectors and have the consequence of a successful attack so widely magnified so that the impact of a successful attack is increased greatly, that we've raised the risk, and what I think we're looking for is an assurance that we've got technical mitigations to respond to that increased risk. So hopefully the output of what the working group is pulling together isn't just a consumer as a user, but is really more oriented towards security professionals and network professionals that would really understand the risk elements and be able to be assured that we're coming up with technical mitigation. So this great cost-saving potential of software-defined networking doesn't result in a significant increase to risk for the nation because we haven't done due diligence in addressing the additional attack vectors.
Yeah, thanks, Admiral, for the clarifying question. Actually, I think we had disabused ourselves of a term incorrectly. So when we mean users in this case, we do mean the users of software-defined networking, not the consumers of the software-defined networks. So the security professionals you talked about, the network service providers, the people that are actually using the technology. So I think we're heading in the direction you wanted us to do. I think we just probably confused you with the term.
Well, it's more than just the term in the slides, because the feedback that I'm getting from the calls is that this is being dealt with at kind of a very general level, and we're not seeing work to respond to the specific questions that we provided in the area.
Okay.
So if you could just go back, and maybe I've got
Will do.
the wrong picture. But we would like to see, to ensure at least that our questions were understood.
Okay. I think, Romani, you feel free to come in, but I think they were. I think we'll go through that with Jeff and Ahmed, and if you'd like to yourself as well, make sure that the outline and the report that we're generating is lined up with that. But,
Very good.
Okay, thank you, though.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Romani, I get that right? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Jeff, I think you're up.
Going back to smartphone security issue, there seems to be quite a bit of concern about the large number of permissions that have to be granted to apps before you can download them. This would even include the so-called bloatware that comes preloaded on the phones, and some of these permissions seem to be broader than what's really required for the app. So I wondered if your group is focusing on that at all, and I don't know if you're aware of the John McAfee's latest initiative called Decentral One, which is focused on that issue, identifying permissions on apps and letting the user decide whether they want to delete the apps, at least those that they've downloaded. Some of the ones that are preloaded, you can't delete and you can't take away those permissions.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that's maybe a 2 year ago kind of thing we were observing as well. And no mere mortal can actually navigate that whole thing, right? I mean, you get the 20 megabyte flashlight application, you kind of wonder what's going on there, right? So I think the hope is that a byproduct of that, of the work that the FCC has kind of started us down, which is the smartphone security checker, can help close those doors when information is inappropriately flowing. We're not trying to solve the front end problem of that. However, back to my appeal for mobile OS provider help, that's the only way I know of to get my arms around that, because ultimately they're the ones presenting those options for the applications to access. So we'll need some help on that front, I think, if we're going to progress on that. Thanks, Jeff.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but the CAC meets tomorrow and in their new session.
Right.
And we will work with them to re-energize their development of the questions.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I didn't mention that. I mean, that was one of my notes, was the CAC has gone through a reformation.
Yeah.
So while it's being reformed,
the broader audience, you may want to explain.
Oh, CAC. Consumer Advisory Council. It's sort of the friendly front end equivalent to the TAC, if you will. That's the way I look at it.
And I might add that reformation is a very positive event that periodically comes into organizations to re-energize, refocus, and improve.
Yeah, our biorhythms are out of sync. Last year when we were working with them, just as we got started with them, their charter expired. And so now their charter is being reinstantiated, and so hopefully we can get hooked up there. But yeah, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
David.
I'm not sure if the consumer focus, I know you mentioned in the context of IoT, I don't know if you also meant it to apply to smartphones. And I guess the one thing I'd suggest really looking at is the intersection between consumer and enterprise that happens at BYOD. That seems like something that, again, provides a significant avenue of penetration that then extends from the consumer into enterprises of all sorts, including increasingly critical infrastructure.
So I think it's a great point. I know from personal experience, back to the previous discussion around public safety devices, that is a work group and an undertaking unto itself, for sure. There's a lot of work we certainly are doing. That's something we can definitely add to the docket. Right now, it's not part of the work plan, though.
And I do realize it's a full docket. But
yeah, thanks, David.
Very good, Kevin.
Yeah, Paul, I was just going to mention from the earlier discussion about the SDN-related group. We have two of the other work groups are working on, SDN NFV. I noticed in your presentation it looked like you're doing some upfront sort of definitional, architectural kind of work and things like that. So we may be able to liaison here between, the
Awesome.
future game-changing and the next generation, and they're both looking at, SDN NFV architectures and how they, impact a number of things. We're not specifically looking at how it impacts security, but at least that base work might feed well into your security analysis.
No, I think that's awesome. Thanks, Kevin. I think if we can all get a common blueprint set of definitions and, way of looking at this, I think that only helps. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Any questions for those on the phone or comments? Hearing none, we'll move forward then to Spectrum and Receiver, and to Lynn and Greg, and somehow we didn't get you next to Lynn as we were meant to do, but I guess we can work with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could have the slide deck up. I'm going to do just a quick introduction and then turn it over to the subject matter experts that are going to go into detail on the three areas of focus that we are addressing. So just as a reminder, this is the mission of this group. We've tried to be mindful of not coloring outside the lines on what we're doing as an overall direction. So we are to make recommendations in areas focused on improving access to and making efficient use of the radio spectrum from a system and a receiver perspective, number one. Secondly, to provide support as the Commission considers TAC recommendations related to the statistical aspects of interference. And lastly, to conduct analysis and make recommendations related to enforcement issues in a rapidly changing RF environment. So this is the makeup of the working group. It is co-chaired by myself and Greg Lappin, who's also one of the subject matter experts, so you'll be hearing from him. We have the four very capable and helpful FCC liaisons and about a dozen or so active participants and others that are contributing to the effort of what we're about. These are the three areas of focus. So we're going to have the primary leaders of these subject groups do their own presentations, and we're hoping that with this longer time slot that's been assigned to us, to fill that out mostly by having somewhat of a two-way conversation with the rest of the TAC members to help us focus our work and to offer your perspective. So we would very much like to get your questions. This is not just a presentation and move on kind of thing as we go through this this agenda. So three areas here. The first is to develop recommendations about the statistics of interference and risk-informed decision-making. We've talked about risk-informed decision-making in general the last couple of TAC meetings. But this will be presented by Pierre DeVries, who's done a great deal of work on this, knows a lot about it, and would like to get your input. Then secondly, recommending strategies for interference resolution and enforcement in a changing RF environment. Dale Hatfield will present that. There is a white paper that was endorsed by the TAC on this general subject, and it's moving to the next logical state of development. And then third, proposed methods for characterizing the operational impact to receiver performance from interference. Greg Lappin is very involved in this and has some outrageous proposals to get your reaction to. So hopefully you'll be interacting with him as well. So I'm going to use the old method of walking the remote around the room to Pierre so that he can start his presentation.
Thanks very much, Lynn. So let's just kick this off to remind everybody about risk-informed interference assessment. The background for this whole question is when the FCC makes a new allocation, a new spectrum allocation. Thank you. That should be it. Yep. It has to balance the claims. It has to balance the claims of incumbents to protection and the claims of new entrants to get permissions to operate. And that's a very difficult balance, obviously, to make. There are tools in the toolkit that the FCC already has and has used for a century. The work here is to add a few more tools, specifically to provide quantitative ways to reason about the risk of harmful interference, where we mean risk to mean you look at all the hazards, you think about the consequences and the probability of that consequence. So to just give you a status update on where we are with that, one of the recommendations that we made last year was that the FCC begin the process of deepening the expertise in the agency and beginning the conversation in the community And in service of that recommendation, we provided the FCC with a detailed list of courses and materials on risk assessment and people who could speak at a conference. And just as a side note, to help this along, Silicon Flatirons will be putting on a conference in the fall, 23rd of October. Put it in your schedule. We'll have a number of people from the Commission there, and we'll actually be addressing risk assessment in spectrum policy coming from the larger picture, 30 years of history in other fields. Second status point, we had guidance from Julie Knapp last year after our work to engage closely with the federal side of spectrum management. And so we provided briefings in Boulder, firstly to the Wireless Spectrum R&D Steering Committee, the WIZARD, that's part of the Federal Networking and IT R&D group, and also to the Commerce Department Spectrum Management Advisory Committee, the CISMAC. Those were actually very engaged conversations, particularly from the CISMAC. There was a lot of interest and enthusiasm in learning more about this topic and working forward on it. Last but not least, and this will actually speak to one of the challenges that I'll note on my last slide, finding resources to work on this problem. It turns out there is, in fact, interest from a couple of research groups in the U.S. and one overseas in this topic. Now all we have to do is to convert that interest into graduate students and research funds. So we're doing our best on that. So the next status slide is just to give you a little bit of background on what we're doing. We've defined a work plan. The medium-term goal, let's say the goal for this year, with luck and a favorable breeze, is to do a risk assessment for a simplified case. In other words, to show how the method that the group recommended last year would work in practice. To set the groundwork for that in the short term, we're actually working on two projects which actually link up with the receiver characteristics work that Greg Lappin will brief you on in a few minutes. The first is to identify the data that would be required for these kinds of risk assessment. So when, what kind of data do we need? When is it available in the appropriate form of statistical distributions? When are there single-valued data and so on? And then the second, which is quite an important and difficult question, when one's trying to assess harm and you're trying to think about consequences, typically you want to think about service-level impacts, because that's really what matters to the users. However, when one does simulation and modeling, typically you use RF metrics. And so the question is, how do you map the RF metrics to the service metrics? And to get at that, we're actually looking at a particular case. The case is the Meteorological Satellite Service in the 1695 to 1710 band. That's actually, that was part of the CSMAC Working Group 1. And this actually goes to another of our challenges, which is the challenge of actually doing work that is interesting and relevant to members of the TAC that isn't actually an active proceeding. It may be that the intersection of those two sets is null. And so what we're doing here is we're taking a proceeding that is recently closed, that is still in people's mind, but with that METSAT band, I mean, that was part of the AWS-1 auction. It's auctioned, the rules are written. Nothing that we do is going to change anything, but we believe we can actually learn a lot about how to do risk assessment from studying that case. So I mentioned that I was going to talk about a few challenges. Let me just mention three of those. I mentioned the cases that are relevant. We're trying to work around that in various ways. I mentioned the METSAT proceeding. The second challenge is just resources, which is finding enough TAC members or folks in their organizations who are able to invest time in this work. Another issue is that the FCC itself has limited resources to do technical work, and so we need to find ways to develop independent expertise. And lastly, expertise, particularly in this area. Risk-informed interference assessment as a practice is about 3 decades old. So the tools and the skills exist. One of the key skills is Monte Carlo simulation. And again, in Spectrum, there are a few people who do that. There's a very impressive group at NTIA that does that under Ed Drusella, but a limited number of people. So finding the skills and the people to do this in the short term is going to be a challenge. And that's my brief. Remote, Dale.
No, we'll wait till the end.
Yes, thank you.
The slides.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to be talking about the part of our work recommending strategies for interference resolution and enforcement in this changing RF environment. And I thought I'd start out first with talking about some significant recent developments that are influencing our efforts. You may recall that the NTIA assigned to the SISMAC several questions regarding enforcement, and that led to the creation of what we call the straw man enforcement proposal. And as Pierre mentioned, what we were doing, this straw man, we were trying to avoid dealing specifically with an ongoing proceeding. So we sort of invented an environment that we could analyze, but not run into ex parte issues. That straw man enforcement proposal was considered at the SISMAC meeting on May 12th in Boulder, and it was adopted by the SISMAC. So it has that official status now, even though, of course, NTIA hasn't said we agree with it. It has been approved by the committee itself, and the reaction, Dennis, you were there too, the reaction to it was, I think, quite positive. So that's one significant development. The other is, of course, we've gotten more details on the FCC's own efforts to modernize their enforcement program. Some of that was made public in early April, and of course, as late as yesterday, there were still being some adjustments made, as I understand it, to the future of that modernization effort here at the Commission. So that's changing again the environment in which we're doing our work. Another significant, of course, thing was the release of the RNO and second NPRM in the 3.5 gigahertz band in April. And of course, here again, we're balancing. We can't address that directly because of the ex parte, but we certainly want to take into recognize what the directions the Commission is painting by that. And of course, as we all know, there's continued technological advances. For example, in SDR radios, of course, we talked about them so long, but it's really kind of happening now. It's one of those things that I'm sort of amazed to go into the lab at the university and see what students and so forth are doing with the SDR radios, and of course capable of tuning over wide frequency ranges, and of course low-cost computer processors and mass storage devices that suddenly make things possible that we couldn't do before, including recording the INQ information for both immediate or forensic analyses. And of course, there's advances too being made in terms of platforms for doing interference type monitoring, and I'm thinking about here, of course, is drones. And then also, and related, we see changing threat vectors here in terms of both malicious and non-malicious but intentional interference. And of course, those are enabled by the same technological developments. If you can take the SDR platform, write software, and just plug in software models, you can create just about any kind of a radio you want. And obviously, that presents additional sorts of threats that we need to take into account from an enforcement standpoint. So that is sort of some of the significant developments that have occurred that impact on our work. And let me then turn, if I could, if I'm going to do this right. Guess we already got it. Let me talk about some of the challenges in refining and trying to extend that straw man proposal. First of all, the straw man was not intended to address the situation where interference is causing an immediate threat to the safety of life and property. You kind of have to divide this world into two parts. There's sort of things that, hey, I'm seeing interference, it's disrupting my commercial mobile, but it's not, there's nothing happening that I absolutely need to address right this minute. But there are other types of things where you have interference directly to an air navigation system or whatever that needs to be addressed with immediately. And we did not consider that at the time. The other thing we didn't contemplate is bilateral sharing. When we were talking about this was mostly thinking about the issue where commercial shares with the government side, not where government might be sharing with private sector spectrum. And of course, when you add that's an additional dimension that needs to be considered. The other challenge is, goes back to this ex parte issue. How can we learn from what the Commission's doing but still keeping clean of the ex parte rules and not doing anything that would be inappropriate in terms of influencing that? And of course, the proceeding that I was mentioned before is the 3.5 gigahertz. And then the other challenge, at least as I step back and look from this, there's all kinds of resources, societal resources, that are being devoted to interference resolution and enforcement, especially in this dynamic new dynamically shared environment that we're having. But those resources are spread over all kinds of different organizations, both private and public. And moreover, within the public sector, then it's still spread even further between the FCC, NTIA, and then individual agencies like, say, the FAA, which is very concerned about protecting its spectrum resources. So we, jumping ahead a little bit, what this is, to me anyway, it's not just the FCC, what the FCC is doing, but it's what the private sector companies are doing in terms of trying to protect their spectrum. It's what we're trying to do in terms of making sure the handsets perform correctly. There's all these things spread out among different agencies and so forth. And as an old-time systems engineer, and I don't say that too strongly anymore. I used to do systems engineering. What it occurs to me, this is a sort of a classic systems engineering problem. It's not just the FCC's problem. It's not just NTIA's problem. It's not just the private sector's problem. It's all of us trying to act together in some sort of an optimum way so that we use society's resources as efficiently as possible. So, going to the next slide, I've already touched on that, needing the systems engineering approach, and of course the first bullet there is what I was just saying is with the resources scattered so widely, that's motivation for looking at it from a systems level standpoint. The other thing is the reality is budgetary constraints, both within the federal government and competitive pressures in the private sector mean that we can't afford to duplicate. In other words, it would be foolish for two organizations to be making measurements when we could figure out a way doing the right sort of systems engineering to prevent that unnecessary duplication of facilities or functions. Third, again, the things that argue for a systems engineering approach is those changing threat vectors for both malicious and non-malicious interference, intentional interference, and the potential for vastly improved interference resolution and enforcement equipment and processing, including techniques like big data and crowdsourcing techniques. The other thing is, too, if you go back to my comment about when you have an immediate threat to life and property, the key thing is being able to act fast, and that says you probably can't do it very well using strictly manual processes. So that argues for trying to do more in an automated fashion, again, tying back to the systems engineering point that I made a couple of minutes ago. So we need the automation both to increase the speed of responses and to reduce cost. And then finally, as I mentioned, the proposed changes in the FCC's own enforcement strategies are obviously impact on what other agencies need to do. And here again, how do we sort of optimize across those different resources? Let me then wrap up, talk a little bit about deliverables. Hopefully by the meeting in December, we'll have been able to update the straw man proposal, incorporating, among other things, some work we've been doing within the group on transmitter identifiers. Obviously, part of the thing of being able to locate who it is causing the interference is having some sort of identifiers, the equivalent of the old call letters, if you like. Also, some work we've been doing on emission designators when you're trying to figure out what the source of the interference is. If you have a limited set of emission designators, of course, it narrows down what you have to look for, or it helps you figure out there's something in here in this band that shouldn't be in here at all. And then passive intermodulation, of course, is something that's really sticky from an enforcement standpoint. You know, when two people are operating perfectly legally, but you've got the proverbial rusty bolt, and you end up with interference in some band that is completely removed. And like I say, both people could be operating otherwise legally. So we'll try to take into account some of those issues in our work on extending the straw man. And then, secondly, we hope to come up with some preliminary recommendations for immediate specific actions. Okay, Mr. Chairman, right, to be taken by the FCC and indirectly NTI, hopefully in a coordinated fashion, to initiate the systems engineering approach that we're talking about. And finally, and I'd hope we'd actually make more progress than what I've indicated here, but come up with a detailed recommendation for a research plan for the systems engineering type study that we've hopefully I've justified here in the presentation I've made. So I think that concludes my portion of the presentation, and we need to pass. Greg.
We're outrageous.
And this is a new role for you, Lynn?
Yeah.
Outstanding.
He's been a great help.
Official designated clicker carrier. This is great.
Well, someone told me we can't throw it.
No, that's right.
So, as the third part of our group, and I think you've all heard bits and pieces of what we've been saying for a couple of years now, and what we're trying to do is bring it all together now. And the interference measurements that we came up with some time ago is morphing into a risk-informed assessment. As enforcement is now morphing into ways to determine what to do about the interference, and I'm trying to terminate's too strong a word, but I'm trying to come up with some good conclusions for how do we deal with receivers. Because there really are two forms of this equation. There's the transmitter, which the FCC has always regulated, and then there's the receiver, which has not always been regulated, actually in FCC not regulated much at all, yet could stand a very large role in whether interference occurs or not. So if we want to be more efficient with the way we assign frequencies, somehow we'd like to know that our receivers can tolerate signals that are closer in frequency to where they are now. In other words, fewer guard bands. So our goal for this year is to provide the FCC with metrics and procedures which aid them in the decision-making process when they're tasked with assigning different services to adjacent frequency bands. And that has been a problem for some time. So we got to thinking, how can we improve that problem? In the past, we tried to look at how are receivers built, what standards are used to determine just how well a receiver is designed to make sure that it doesn't receive more interference than it needs to. When we did surveys of incumbent services, we found a wide variety of different kind of standards, and some with none at all. We looked at the frequency allocations to see where things were being allocated in different frequencies today, and then what receiver design standards there were for the things in those frequencies. And what we found was that there's such a big variation in the quality of receivers, at least what's publicly available. We're told sometimes that privately these receivers are designed to very high standards, but it's hard for anyone else to find out what those standards are. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. Thank you, Lynn. We're talking on the conclusions part of the slide now. The standards are, if they're not known to people in other services, how can those people design or even build their systems in such a way to avoid interference to those receivers? And because of that, it's very hard to predict what an adjacent channel interferer or user will do in terms of interference to that existing service. So what we're trying to work on this year is to develop a common set of parameters that describe receiver performance. And we've looked at several other groups that have been doing this. 3GPP has done a very fine job of setting up a comprehensive set of parameters for receivers as well as entire systems that help to prevent interference between things in their system and receivers, transmitters and receivers in their system. Since they don't know so much about other systems, they can't prevent interference from others, but they provide a good set of metrics so that other people know what their receivers are capable of. ETSI in Europe has some procedure called net filter discrimination, where they predict the compatibility between adjacent services based on the characteristics of the transmitters and receivers. The NTIA came out several years ago with something called interference protection criteria. And another European group, CEPT, has an ECC, a European Communications Committee, that performs predictive coexistence studies. All of these are doing things that we would like to provide the FCC with tools to do for themselves. So what we're proposing to do this year is, and this is certainly not the final say on this. We're just in June, so we're going to be saying a lot more. But in our initial proposals, we'd like to come up with some way that new services who want to obtain frequency allocations can do an analysis of their impact on the incumbents in the frequencies nearby. And I've been saying adjacent channel, and earlier in a conversation, it was brought up that sometimes adjacent is too limiting. Interference can happen many channels away. So those analyses have to take place as well. So if we can come up with a set of requirements that the FCC can give to an incumbent for their analysis to say, if you give us an analysis based on these parameters, we'll be able to tell if you're going to interfere with this incumbent or not. And our goal is that at the December 2015 meeting, we will present an actionable white paper that outlines the recommended procedures and guidelines for the Commission in these kind of proceedings. Now, this is quite preliminary, and these are some of the challenges that we'll be dealing with in the rest of the year. First of all, the analysis. Who should perform it? There are all kinds of issues there. Who's going to pay to perform this analysis, and who should be made to pay to perform this analysis? And once the analysis is performed, can the results be trusted? In the back of our minds, we have a certain other proceeding, which I think probably can remain nameless, but one where this type of situation came into play and caused a lot of problems. So what we'd like to do is somehow come up with a standardized form of analysis that will help to know if there's going to be interference. Now, in one of our preceding years, we came up with the harm claims threshold, which the incumbent could be asked to calculate, to say, this is the amount of energy that we can tolerate before we would claim that it's harming our system. So that could be another part of this equation. Ask the incumbent to come up with a harm claims threshold that will help then the new service to determine if they're going to stay under that value. But there are other issues that concern us as well. First of all, incumbent receivers aren't always designed to strict standards. We discovered that already. So if there's a service that has a lot of different receivers made by different people at different times, what standards or what parameters are those receivers designed to? And how do you do an analysis in that situation? And again, I'm not here with the answers for that today, maybe a little discussion. Also, if the incumbent has any confidential or proprietary information about their system, what's the motivation for them to give up that information, and to whom? It certainly would be in their best interest to share the information if they want to avoid being interfered with, but then there are a lot of other issues for them to consider as well, especially if the new service is a competitor of theirs. And that comes to my last bullet: can this process be misused by either party? If an incumbent doesn't want a service put next to them, can they come up with a bogus harm claims threshold that nobody could ever meet? Likewise, if a competitor wants to get next to an incumbent and find out how they do their business, can they insist on finding out things about their receivers so they can avoid interfering? And again, these are questions that in our weekly calls we're going to be delving into in great detail. So let me open it up for questions. I'm sure there could be a lot of them based on our earlier conversations.
David, did you have a question or just, okay? A remnant from the last round. All right. Are there questions or comments from the group?
Any incumbents out there?
Any comments or questions from those in cyberspace?
This is Milo. I have two.
Please go ahead, Milo.
So, Dale, we've talked about before about the nature of the threat from really low-cost jammers that seem to be being imported and SDRs that are now very flexible in terms of frequency. But they also create the opportunity, potentially, that if the FCC were to, for example, create a bounty program where if a set of users were to detect interference, they could get compensated as part of the fine that was issued. That entire ecosystem could be transformed into a tool for enforcement as well. And then on the second question is, while we are putting a lot of energy into trying to deal with interference and find it quicker and take action, one of the other things we could do is, particularly with technologies like LTE, is to make them more robust to interference. And that includes doing things like protecting the control channels through encryption, the use of beamforming to throw nulls and not just gain, throwing nulls at jammers. It would seem like there's not a lot of energy going into this, but I think the Commission and the TAC could investigate what could be done to actually make changes to the underlying protocols to make them more resilient in the face of jamming. And I think that's going to be more important, particularly as public safety and other critical infrastructure moves to the LTE industrial base.
Yeah, thank you, Milo. Those are the notion of a bounty. I think that is fresh thinking. I think we need to think about some very innovative ways. Perhaps there's problems with that, but that's a sort of out of the box thinking that needs. And I think the technology may be helping us a little bit in that regard in terms of when I see the kids with a dongle and it's a receiver that tunes from DC to light sort of thing. There's tremendous tools out there that could be used in such a program. Anyway, we thank you for the suggestion. We need to think about that. And then your notion of making systems more robust. We have not been dealing with that. Perhaps somebody else on the subcommittee on the working group would have some comments on that. But that certainly, the beamforming, the null forming, and the massive MIMO, those sort of techniques are certainly have a lot to recommend them. And I hate to not respond more fully, but it's something we certainly should think more about. So thank you for raising both points.
And it was great of you, Milo, to volunteer to join the working group. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Dale in particular on this case.
Yes.
Other questions or comments from the cyberspace side or from those around the table? Seeing none, we will move forward, even though Greg was anticipating and hoping for even more discussion. It's a very, very important topic, especially this last piece of bringing things together. This working group has been proceeding forward for quite a long time and sort of bringing things forward to a place where the actionable recommendations are in place and establishing a framework, I think was some of the conversation in an earlier session. That would be highly desirable. So we'll continue to move down that path. With that, we'll turn things over to the dynamic duo, Nomi and Adam.
Adam's going to kindly lead our presentation today. Just as our group began to get busy, our company became involved in the transaction, and so Adam has really kindly taken the heavier lead here, and I'm very grateful. And I've been participating in some of the last calls, and I think the group's done great work. And this is a really exciting working group, and actually it's one where the whole TAC has given input, so we've had a lot of fun with all of that input. So thanks, Adam.
I will note, Adam, we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule at this point.
Is that right? I've got to hit my 10 minutes. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is jump directly to the the meat of what the group is doing. In the deck, you will actually find our charter and an appendix. And let's see, how do I advance this? Okay, one more. Okay. So basically what we have done is gathered ideas both from the working group and from the TAC on what some of these game-changing technologies could be. We have formed a number of subgroups and sort of broken things up into 4 buckets. The first are technologies that could fundamentally change demand in some ways that we would find hard to deal with. And included in that are new functionalities and business models and their impacts. And Brian Markwalter, in fact, will be reporting on what that subgroup is doing. The second subgroup deals with capacity. Jack Nishelski is dealing with that. And these are technologies that could dramatically improve the capacity of the networks that we have. And then the third bucket we created is architectures, and that is technologies which would cause us to build our networks in a completely different way from what we have done in the past, essentially. And then lastly, the working group as a whole is looking at the basic technologies that really sort of drive the innovation, and they're sort of the ingredients in the kitchen for sort of the more compound technologies. I think at this stage we've been sort of sorting and selecting what are the most impactful technologies. So each of the sub-working groups is in process on that. I would say 2 of them are sort of in the earlier stages. I think the way we have arranged it, Kevin Sparks is probably has had his subgroup go the furthest on this. And so I think what you should do is consider today's presentation as work in progress. If I could go on to the next view graph. And if I look at the products for year end, it's to do a short write-up on the technologies and ideas that have been gathered, sort of a 2-sheeter on why they're important, what the impacts could be. And then each of the subgroups has been chartered with selecting a limited number of technologies, 2, 3, something along those lines, where in fact we will do a much more in-depth write-up with the prioritized technologies. We expect to create in-depth presentations on the building blocks, create a set of actionable recommendations, and then at the end of the year have an informational briefing. I think Walter is in the process of figuring out whether we do that just as part of the TAC or do some additional events around it. I would say peripherally, the other thing to mention is that we are going to have a number of subject matter experts join us that talk about specific technologies. We have already done that on 5G. We have done that on massive MIMO. And so at this point, let me start off by handing this over to Brian, who's going to lead the discussion on the demand sub-working group.
Thank you. So down here. All right, thank you, Adam and Naomi. And let's see, there we go. So I'll be covering the demand sub-working group. And as Adam mentioned, we began this process actually with an outreach to the whole TAC and collected a wide range of input on things that might
change the circumstances by which we think about communications in the future. And we broke them out into these 3 subcategory areas, and demand and business model being one of them. And so here's what ended up, this slide here shows what ended up on our plate. And so what I want to emphasize is, this is like taking the brainstorming session and this is what you walk away with. So it's, I'm pointing out this uncategorized. So we haven't really, what we're getting ready to do is separate applications from technologies and figure out how they relate to each other. So we have huge categories like smart cities and personalized medicine, other fundamental changes that are going on in lifestyle, much of which will be driven by communication capability, different ways we're going to educate, and then things I might categorize more as technology like augmented reality, and we'll see a slide in just a second that explains how these might overlap and interact. Other big changes we see coming are autonomous vehicles or self-driving, commercial use of UAVs or drones, National Public Safety Network. Pervasive video just really refers to the fact that many of these things, not only what we read every day about the prevalence of video in terms of just overall bits on the internet, but that it's going to be a huge part of everything we do. It trickles into educational models, personalized medicine, everything else. And lastly, device-to-device communication, which we may end up parceling out to one of the other groups. So if we just look at one sample of the difference we're trying to get a handle on in terms of technology versus application. So something like augmented reality, we see in gaming and entertainment where there's a lot of work going on, but also applicability to smart cities. So we take a technology and we have to figure out how is that going to be used in certain applications. So if you look on the right side of the slide where you see a broad category like smart city that there's no crystal clear definition for. Some will say that it's cities attempting to use intelligence, communication, and technology across 3 or more functional areas of a municipality. So we can definitely see how augmented reality might be used in that case where a tablet or smartphone or even eyewear is used to help people navigate or know what's around them in a city, and that might be provided as part of the infrastructure of the city. It clearly can be used in educational settings. There's a lot of discussion about doing things we may have done in the past, like dissections and stuff that may be not so convenient or just too expensive to do, that you can get the similar learning experience through augmented reality. So that's kind of where we are, is understanding the difference between technology changes and what's really going to create huge new kind of demands because of the way we live our lives. And then last slide here from my group is really this is kind of a picture of what we're trying to get our heads around, which is what's our world like in a few years when we could count on dense urban environments, smarter cities. We see the picture in the upper right is that's a temperature tracking device that's being promoted to the market. There will be a lot of digital health and fitness related technologies. A whole set of AR glasses down there. Bottom left is Mercedes concept car for autonomous driving, and the whole point of that is it's almost like a lounge space or a work environment. So we need to think about what happens when nobody's really tasked with driving anymore, and now we already know they're going to expect to communicate and watch video and everything else. So plus drones and other fun things that we'll be doing. So that's it for the demand subgroup, I think. Yes, I'll pass it on to Jack. I guess we can hold questions till the end. Is that best?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Let me move on to the first slide here. So the capacity subworking group is looking at the topics on this slide. We've actually got 2 slides full of topics, and we're inviting proposals, presentations, and these topics to look at on our biweekly conference calls. I won't read through all these because it goes on for 2 pages again. I'll let people take a look at this one and the next. Right. Now, what we've done to this point is we've only had 2 meetings, and we've looked at massive MIMO, I think, as Adam already mentioned, and at 5G as a whole. We looked at all the white papers that were available for 5G. And the plan for the next couple of months are really to dig through the rest of the topics that I flashed through on the first couple slides with an eye towards actionable recommendations. Okay, so if people have thoughts, if they have some ideas that we might want to take up to the FCC on these topics, here's your chance. Get in touch with me. We'll get you on the agenda. We'll get you scheduled to present. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to hand it off to Kevin. Yeah.
That was a lot of material very quickly.
Yep.
Okay, we can advance the slide. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to the third of the three groups. The first one around things that create demand. The second around things that boost the capacity and coverage, and the last one is the types of things which are really kind of impacting the architecture. It can be the architecture of the network, the architecture of networks, the architecture of the industry, and different relationships between entities within the industry. So these kind of sort of big changes. And so when we first partitioned all these things into these different bins, of course, I was clever enough to volunteer for the one that had the shortest list of all the bins that we created. But this was also the area of greatest interest for me personally. What we've done so far is to carve out the items which we thought were good candidates for having these sort of big architectural type changes. And we've gone through each of these and discussed these, and we've had some expert presentations. So we've gone to the point where we have kind of a first level, assessment of these. We did go through a rating exercise to kind of get a sense of which were going to rise to the top, so we could start focusing our energies on that. And we rated these across 5 criteria. The first 3 were a little easier, I think, for people to do because they're really looking at how much impact there is to the network, to what degree that it would change business models, and how much it might spur innovation. And those, I think, were a little bit clearer, a little bit easier. And then the harder ones, at this point in the process, was determining which ones would have the most impact to what the FCC does, and also which ones would be most likely to be actionable. So for those, we really had to dust off the crystal balls to kind of get a sense of those. But in the process, we do have some front runners that are emerging from this. Rather than looking at this, I'd like to go to the second slide here, and categorize the space that these are in, because these are not independent technologies or trends. They're somewhat interdependent, and particularly the ones that are rising, the ones that have the biggest impact in the network and the biggest impact to business models and things are fairly closely related. So we had some discussion earlier about SDN, and then usually SDN and NFV you look at together because they're very closely interrelated and self-supporting. And what we realized was that this was probably the area of biggest overlap between the topics. So the way we're thinking about SDN and NFV is it has sort of two roles here. One is as a broad enabler of many of the other sort of game-changing trends and technologies that we're seeing. So it underlies a lot of the other things that we're looking at. But it also has sort of a special role if you look at sort of SDN in the larger sense, in the overall network sense, of creating programmability into the network. By programmability of the network, what we mean is that things that used to be just internals of the network can now be sliced up and offered as network resources and instantiated over things like, could be portals, but also APIs from from cloud providers, from computer systems and things like that. So you can actually composite new services, but you don't have to own all the functions in the network. So we think that so on SDN specifically, we're going to focus the big part of our attention on the programmable network aspects, because this is the part that will make the big difference in terms of new business models. And I was talking with Walt over lunch. An analogy that came to me was it's a little bit like moving from the barter system to the monetary system. It's sort of by being able to instantiate these things and create networks out of pieces of a lot of other networks, it's almost like a grease that will now you may be thinking I'm describing something that's really far out, and it will take years to get to the point where this is all working like a greased machine. But in any case, that's kind of the way we're thinking about this, is as something that really spurs a lot of new kinds of business models, a lot of innovation, opens a lot of new challenges, probably solves some security problems and creates some new ones, for instance, as we discussed earlier. So some of the other high priority areas that are related to this have to do with architectural changes in 5G, particularly in the core of 5G, and kind of closely related to that is being able to mix many different kinds of air interfaces, many kinds of RANs and radio access technologies in a kind of a seamless way. Not strictly requiring, let's say, SDN and NFV, but certainly those contribute a lot to being able to do that in a very flexible way. So that's kind of a core cluster of things which are sort of high on our list for focusing our attention on. Next to that is probably the vRAN or Cloud RAN area, which brings a lot of the sort of virtualization ideas, but to the wireless access, and it's kind of on the periphery of the core, and there's certainly changes there. So that's an important area, maybe a step down in priority for us. A couple of the other areas, WebRTC is a very exciting area, maybe a little bit more near term than some of these others, and certainly has the impact of changing kind of session-based communications and changing the way in which they're implemented. A lot of end-to-end scenarios where there may be no operator in the middle. Of course, it works with operator networks as well, but it can create a very different looking, calling, not just voice, but of course video calling type of marketplace. And finally, free space optics. This one has kind of been floating to the bottom, but we haven't really had a champion come in yet to push on free space optics, which is also covered in the capacity and coverage group. So I hope that gives you a sense of where we're headed in this particular group, and welcome any questions for all of the talks.
Questions or comments around the table? Any? Okay, David, go ahead.
I guess I look at this sort of list. A number of these are technologies that have been sort of not just in research but in development for quite a while. So I think it's a great report. I'm not criticizing the report itself. I'm just wondering if there's another set of technologies further out in the time horizon that we should also be looking at. And this is not because I have a list of my own. It's a real question. I'm assuming you sort of canvassed DARPA and other folks. Is the cupboard bare?
I'd say two comments. First one, please join the group. And the second one is this. I think when we took a look at impact horizons of what would be actionable, we came to a conclusion that we should be looking at a sweet spot that's roughly 5 to 7 years out. to actually consider something on that time scale means it's already got to sort of show in the least that leading foot of having appeared, which is why you're probably familiar with the technologies at this point. But that was the background for that. I would say, honestly, part of the discussion to have within the group is, I think Russ's question, what could break the network? Okay, we still haven't considered that. And then really, where can you lean forward a little bit and say something comes out of the woodwork and starts affecting, in the least, the business behavior, things along those lines. Okay, so I think a very good question.
I guess maybe put it in your time context. It feels like a number of these then are in the 3 to 5, and I worry that does this suggest somewhere that we have a little window that's kind of short. Somewhere in the 5 to 10, and in your context 5 to 7. Is the research pipeline running dry?
Let me do the following. If you go back in time and look at all the workshops that were done on software-defined radios, how that was going to be the future, and you look at the time scale, you find the foot is still fairly long, essentially.
Yeah, I think my paper was about 93.
93, okay. So, okay, no comment.
David, I would also add to that I think we've had a lot of discussion about timeframes as well within the groups as we've discussed these, and exactly what's the criteria. So 5G, of course, it's well understood that that's about 5+ years out. A lot of these things fall in the 5G bin of technologies. The other part, another one you're probably thinking of would be like SDN, as something that's been in development and it's in, it's deployed in networks and things today. That's true. I think what we're primarily looking at is not so much just the data center usage of SDN, but rather the general telco WAN use of SDN, and then even more importantly, as it's put together into a network level programmability. And we know that's going to take years to build up and be really in place. And so things like that we're including because the magnitude of the change is so large.
I would actually say, as an example, if you look at something like IP protocol and naming technologies, you look at the time scale to update tables, things of that sort, how dynamic can you get today with all the legacy that's actually deployed?
Yeah, again, I'm not being at all critical. I'm actually very supportive of the work you've done. It just caused me to worry, so maybe here's a request, which is after you get all through this docket, if you have a moment to spare at the end, in September, October, absolutely. Could you, maybe it would be helpful from an FCC perspective to have a view of how healthy is the research pipeline, and should the government be, should the FCC be sort of suggesting or not suggesting to, to the administrative branch that they may be a need to refresh that pipeline. And I honestly don't know the answer to the questions. That's why I think it would be good to have an opinion on.
Let me maybe add one more dimension to this, because we also elected to talk about the basic technologies that underlie these advances. So if you were to look at that, it's the Moore's Law curve for computing and what it implies for storage, for software, for sensors, for other things. So if you look at the back of the presentation, I would say you get more of that forward-leaning feeling from those basic technologies.
I think we're going to have to move on. Adam has brought us back to our normal place, which is 10 minutes, running 10 minutes late.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam and team. Actually, this was one of the risky areas to make such a vibrant and interesting topic one of our short topics, but we will expect it to be a long topic the next go-around. So thank you, and Russ, if you would take us on to the next generation of Internet.
Sure.
So need some slides. Next generation internet service characteristics and features. There we go. So I noticed I look around the room, I think it's the lowest blood pressure I've seen today. So this is exciting. This is about the next generation internet. So get excited about this. This is the future. Now, I do empathize with the Game Changers group. Predicting the future, David, is very difficult. And we've run into some of that with the next generation internet characteristics. And I think what you're going to see today in our readout is, a little bit of where we are today, why we're here, and where we think we're going to go and why. What are those drivers? So that's the journey we want to take you on in this presentation. So first off, I want to thank the working group members. We have a very good, diverse group. We could always use more diversity in our team, so anybody else who wants to join, we'd love to have you. I do think it's an exciting topic. It does go beyond 5 years. However, I would say a lot of the data you're going to see in here is really 5 years in time frame where forecasts, or at least fairly good. After 5 years, I think they become very fuzzy for the most part, and that's where we have to extrapolate. So I will start to do my best to fast forward a little bit here on the next deck of slides. Here we go. So, the first thing we did was take the very lengthy, wordy paragraph that the FCC gave us and tried to distill it down into what the Commission asks were. And I'm just going to hit what the Commission hypothesis is. You folks can read the top piece, because we've really, I think, gone through the phase in the attack about this transition to IP, why, and what the effects are. But the Commission hypothesis really boils down to a best effort network is evolving towards one where quality of service is a growing concern. Also, need for benchmarks to measure quality of experience and support the rich services, and the internet will transition to a role of critical infrastructure. So keep those in mind as we go through this presentation. This is a nice visual, by the way, in terms of the where we are, why we're here, where we're going in terms of drivers. As you notice in the graphic, we started off, yesterday's internet was fairly basic. We were talking about connecting computers. Today's internet, I think we're all aware many things are connected. Tomorrow's internet is about everything being connected, machines, you name it. This creates a little bit of a change in terms of the architecture, at least in our view, and we'll get to some of those drivers shortly. So as we look at what a little more detail on the Commission asks, in terms of what they've asked us as a working group to comment on. As I mentioned, critical infrastructure, PSTN service transition, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, public safety, governance, metrics, new technologies. The good news is, this seems like a lot of work for a year, and it is. We wouldn't be able to do it all without the rest of the TAC. So we're coordinating very closely with the Game Changer group. Kevin's a part of our team. We're leveraging that on SDN. There's a lot of past work on PSTN transition, Internet of Things. Cybersecurity is a work in progress. Just a note, we have grayed out governance. It's one of the areas we've worked with the FCC in terms of advice and decided let's not focus on that as priority number one right now. The FCC is really not as heavily involved. They have a hands-off approach on standards and so forth. We do want to learn from what standards and governance bodies are doing, but it's not a key focus for our group. Okay, so I call this my motherhood and apple pie slide. This is, I think, it's hard to argue with this slide. At least I hope it's hard to argue. This is what we all believe the internet should support. It's open, offers efficient and reasonable access, provides a means to support real-time and other latency-sensitive applications. It's adapted over time, access to legal content, and protects users' confidentiality. So those are kind of the tenets in a nutshell of what the next-gen internet should support as well. We don't see a big change in those or a shift. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to John. I'm going to keep the clicker so that I can move you fast through these next few slides. So John's going to talk about really detailed where we are and our expected growth and some pretty graphics.
He clearly doesn't trust me to go through this at the appropriate pace. And I'm too far away to kick. So when you look at the discussion on the next-gen internet, the conversation itself doesn't have to go.
Please. Here are the slides.
There we go.
I wanted to have a picture of you, John.
I don't know if that helps or not. The conversation is fairly short before you get to the idea that video is what is changing the way we think of the internet, and it has been that trend for a number of years. So we decided to grab a look at the different devices, because when we started the TAC, we were looking really at the PSTN transition, and voice being a relatively important point that all of us are concerned with. But when you look at it in terms of the kind of traffic it generates and the number of devices, as you go to the right on this slide, the things that are really taking the bandwidth going forward all consume much more bandwidth on a real-time basis than does voice. So the video streaming apps, if it's a short-form video, standard definition, it's a couple of megabits per second. If it's a high def, it could be up to 7 megabits per second. And if it's one of the new 4K streams, an ultra high definition, Cisco estimates that at 18 megabits per second. So when you start talking about 7 to 18 megabits per second for video, you could have an entire good-sized community making simultaneous voice calls and not total up what one person streaming an ultra-high definition movie is consuming. So if we hit the next one. So, and this data is from Cisco's Visual Networking Index that they published 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was very timely, and we use this not because Russ insisted that Cisco be the source for the data, but specifically, we use this because they put it out there in public domain. It's widely quoted, and it becomes something that everybody can access without a license if they want to go in and read the full report. So where we are today, if you just add up the consumer internet traffic that's being consumed, it adds up to 98.3 exabytes per the Cisco VNI. And where it's growing is up to 314.6, and the percentage of video today is growing from 73% of the smaller pie all the way up to 84% of the larger pie. So as more and more smart TVs, more and more devices are enabled to receive video streams that exceed the standard smartphone, the data is going to continue to grow as driven by video. So we can have the next one. So when we started thinking about drivers, it occurred to us that there are so many different drivers driving different things that there's this alignment between consumer and business demand and new technologies that join together are enabling a tremendous amount of growth across the spectrum. And when you total all those things up, it adds up into very large volumes of data. So one of the aspects that we looked at was the number of devices, and they're going to almost double in the next 5 years. The speeds that are estimated to be out there for the average United States broadband subscriber are going to a little more than double, regardless of whether you're accessing via a fixed network or whether you're accessing via a wired network. The traffic volume, as we already showed, is going to grow dramatically from under 100 exabytes per year to 315 roughly. In that next time frame, and the shift we already mentioned in the amount of video is the underlying foundation that's going to drive all that growth. The way we access our content is also changing. The percent of wireless traffic is roughly doubling over the plan, and even with that, it only gets to be about 12% of the total internet that's being consumed. And then finally, if you look at the last area, there's a shift going on in how, as Kevin was just talking about, virtualization and network-wide software management of a network. While that's happening, we also see that content owners are working hard to move their content from centralized areas to closer to where the consumer is actually accessing the content. and that is creating an interconnection that is moving from long-haul or backbone-type networks closer to the metro. And so a tremendous amount of traffic that has interconnected to the long haul is going to be interconnected instead directly to the metro. All right. So when you talk a little bit more about the drivers, the fact that we have compute and content on this slide together in the first sentence does not or should not imply that we think those two will move in lockstep. We consider them separate, but we consider them at the same time. So content, clearly the content owners are moving where they interconnect. They're closer to where the consumers consume their product. And that is going to drive people to have the discussion around where is the data cached, how is it accessed, is it co-located, and the broadband access service providers, data centers, that type of thing. As to compute, there's discussion. We're at least of two minds in the working group so far that it makes more sense to keep the compute function centralized, but it can also be distributed. So different people are saying there's value in both. The boundaries that have traditionally existed between the content owners and the broadband access providers will also blur as different pieces of content and network elements get moved directly inside the network of the access provider. Less traffic going interdomain, more traffic being pulled from consumer directly from something on net that they can access without having to cross multiple boundaries. And I think the reasons for that will become clear in a second. All right? And then Russ asked me a new question because everybody talks about wireless growth, and when you talk about who are the next billion users of the internet, they're largely wireless users, but not in the United States. The United States, because of how mature broadband is, still generates a heck of a lot of data, but even with that, the rate of mobile access is growing at roughly twice the rate of fixed access in the amount of consumption. But because it's starting from such an imbalance, it's still a little bit less than 12% of the total consumption is through a wireless smartphone, other device. So Russ asked me to project that out using the same growth rate that had been projected by the Cisco VNI report, and when we did that, we discovered that the pie grows dramatically and that by 2025, wireless using the same 25.5% compounded growth rate would reach about 25% of the total broadband consumption. So that's where we see that happening. And as we know, wireless is only wireless to the access point, and then you've got to drive fiber much deeper to support the proliferation of wireless access that's going to be out there. So, Russ? So to hit the number of things that we've considered so far is that we're in the midst of a massive cultural and societal change in the way we use and access data. It's going to be more and more mobile. It's going to become more and more encrypted. We're all going to have many more devices than we currently have. Some we will carry with us. Others will be attached in our homes, in our cars, in other places. And traffic during the busiest hours will grow faster than traffic off hours. Devices, the future of the U.S. Internet is more devices, not more people to speak of. Enterprises who have traditionally purchased dedicated services for different types of traffic have been converging that traffic over the last number of years, and that trend will continue, and things that have always been done via purely private links will gradually shift over to pure internet-based networks. Pervasive services. The idea that we're going to have to go look for things like our video services or medical services, home monitoring or whatever, is, I think, an older idea about the way we use services. And going forward in the future, we think access to these will be embedded and contextual, and just in the important way that we live our lives. And as you start to go onto whatever device you're at and looking for specific data, the ability to access that and interact with it will be contextually built into the app or device or system that you are using. And then programmability, the ability to customize, to rearrange, evaluate, control from a software perspective are going to be a critical part to being able to respond at the speed that consumers, enterprises are going to demand. And through all this, the broadband internet access service provider will be delivering a service that more and more is considered critical. So that access, that broadband access piece, as we begin to transition from dedicated single-purpose built networks to these networks that share multiple applications over the broadband network or the broadband access are going to get more and more critical. Russ?
Please don't take down the slides. Okay, so that's pretty much a view of sort of where we are, how we got here, and some of the projections, at least on a 5-year focus. Now we're going to take a little bit of the deep dive we did in a couple of these areas. And, really as we dive into bandwidth, QoS, and QoE, we go back to the requests from the TAC. And these are the main questions we have. Does the next generation internet require QoS? If so, what are the driving factors that would require QoS? And those are some of the services even John talked about. How do we define, what that QoS would be if there is a QoS requirement? And then what are the consumer QoE expectations? And obviously we need to look at this with the Game Changer group in terms of what impacts either technology or new capabilities on the network would require. So some of the major factors affecting internet QoE: interdomain, interconnect peering. I think these are all probably fairly well known to you, but it's worth mentioning these network design practices, everything from CDN routing as well as how you design your network, which we had a discussion on. That's not always a homogeneous architecture across every SP or operator. Encryption encapsulation, we'll spend a little more time on that. Limited lack of bandwidth, traffic shaping, as well as congestion across the network. So bandwidth and QoE. So again, this seems obvious, but we want to call it out. Bandwidth is just one of the many factors. Increasing bandwidth does not solve QoS. It does not equate to QoE or QoS. Each party independently enacts, manages, and applies QoS to the traffic or to its applications. It really does not span across multiple networks. There's also differential treatment of traffic in the forwarding plane. And then getting to the metrics and measurements, which were in the ask, clearly there's other factors: jitter, latency, delay, packet loss. They may not be meaningful due to multiple networks, though, and the difficulty gets to be how do you actually metric those when you go across different ASs? And ASs become blurry, as we talked about. So everyone may be asking, what's the definition of what you're calling QoE and QoS? Well, here you are. So QoS really attempts to objectively measure the service delivered by the vendor, and it's typically tied to a contract or a pre-agreed arrangement, but it's also a tool that you can use in terms of what settings you use for different services. So it could be outside of just the typical SLA contract. QoE is much more subjective. It is the user experience. There's a lot of factors involved. And, to be honest, customers don't care about the QoS parameters. They care about the experience. Okay, so next slide, we have a little visual on some of the triggers. Now, there's three main areas we see for the QoE experience. There's the content, there's the transit, and there's the broadband capacity piece. Now, within each of those, there's different triggers that are controlled either by the edge provider or the ISP control. I'm not going to, dive deep into this slide just in the effort of time. I think we're still a little bit behind, but you'll see the different triggers and the different levels of parameters that could be have an impact on the actual QoE as it goes across the network. So I think the next slide helps bring that home with a picture. If you take a look, just for instance, you could have multiple CDNs in the network, including the white CDN in the metro could be the local ISP. Bottom line is there is really no current solution for inter-domain QoS. Intra-domain QoS is achievable and implemented in most networks today, but inter-domain is not. Much of that is driven by business models as well as the technical issues. There is no agreed upon approach or solution today. And this is the core of our question. If we as ATT&CK identify QoS as a need, how would you implement it across a network? Okay, so another key piece, there are technologies exist today for congestion management and traffic shaping. There are some of the impacts, though, from encryption, if you note at the bottom, as well as from traffic increase. And that's the real issue is the two together could even make that issue more of a problem. But we'll dive a little deeper into encryption. But clearly doing things like packet marking and mission control, caching, rate control, routing, anybody who builds networks is very familiar with that today. And the visual of that showing, okay, pick your location for a problem. Pretty much congestion can happen anywhere within the network. It's not like there's this one point in the network where there's a congestion problem. So the real driving point here is it happens either anywhere from in the home of a consumer all the way back to the interconnect between a content provider and either an ISP or a transit provider. So a little bit of a deep dive, and I want to thank Milo Medin for a lot of the work he did in this particular area. He's very passionate about this topic, and he may weigh in if he's still on the call. This may also be more of a near-term issue, but we're trying to understand, too, what that longer-term impact could be. So, we're starting to see much more encryption. You'll see the chart on the right, which your eyes typically go to first. Very big growth just in 1 year in encryption. So when I talk about short-term, we're seeing a move from 29% of the traffic being encrypted today to almost 65% next year. This is being driven a lot by the Netflix, and others followed YouTube very, very quickly afterwards. Expected to be SSL encrypted by the end of the year. Accelerated growth in SSL by default since Google ranking announcement, and ad networks are all working on SSL enablement as well. Just to look at the service provider impact of encryption, DPI, transparent caching, and some of the firewalling will most likely break traditional DPI and caching, transparent caching. Less ability to track evolution of traffic types and services. There's still the ability, but you don't have the granularity. May complicate traffic management. I think that's somewhat the same point. Now this may be in limited SPs. Some of the SPs we talk to feel they can still do traffic management even with the majority of traffic being encrypted. Payload compression, often used for microwave backhaul, fails, reducing effective capacity delivered. There's also issues on SATCOM systems where some of their optimization techniques become ineffective. Other impacts, there are at least one positive, much more complicated, that may or may not be a positive. Significantly improves resiliency in the man-in-the-middle attacks, and also improves user privacy and prevents ISP tracking and analysis, super cookies, etc. Much more complicated task for traffic enforcement, though, potentially. So they'll have to have a set of keys. Okay. Summary. So what's next? How much time do we have? There's about 10 slides in the summary. I'm just kidding. So we're down to the last slide here. So the real key point, and obviously we're at the tip of the iceberg. We have work to do here in the next 6 months. It's an Uber topic for the group. Okay, I can't use Uber. It's a big topic for the group, a broad topic. Bottom line, video is eating the internet, and it is aggressive. It uses aggressive protocols. It's become a very large portion of it. Now, how will that change? Next slide. Oh, you're missing the Pac-Man slide.
Right.
Sorry. Sorry about that. CDN and compute, we're definitely going to dive into that much deeper. We see those two as very, very big impacts on the next-gen internet. Not necessarily together, as John mentioned, but we do see compute moving to the edge, maybe even into routing. That'll have architectural effects on the NG internet. Encryption we've covered. As the network goes, allegedly dark, what are the impacts on all the parties? Also, QoS metrics and reporting, we need to assess the options. We're still at the beginning cycle on that. QoE, determine expectations. Like we said, we need to figure out what are those expectations from consumers, and then how would we measure those. SDN, working directly with Kevin and the Game Changer team and others on the impact on ASs, and then cross-domain. We see sort of a short time frame where SDN stays within an AS in the next 5 years, but after that we're not 100% sure, and we need to take a deeper dive. And then the last one, ISP heterogeneity. There are disparity in architectures. You have what you would call the top tier service providers who have more of a common network infrastructure, and transit providers, same thing. But then you have literally hundreds of other providers that are not as heterogeneous. So we need to take a look at what that impact could be across the whole next-gen internet. With that, hopefully we're close to on time and open for Q&A. How are we doing on time? You're good.
You're ahead.
Questions?
Questions? Marty.
Am I on?
You're on.
I hesitate to bring this up because I know you're going to say join the group. But first of all, it's a magnificent body of description that you've got, but you left out a couple of things. One thing is your definition of critical. If you say that critical means that a person has to have it to exist in society, which is my definition, water is critical. And you don't provide water by providing it at reasonable cost. You provide the water whether people need it or not. Nothing in the descriptions I saw addresses the issue of how do you make the internet available at a cost where everybody can have certain services. I think that's a crucial issue. The second one is your conclusion that video is everything. And I guess I don't agree with that. And I just want to give you one example. I think healthcare is going to be one of the critical services that's going to be provided that everybody is going to have. I did a little computation, and it turns out that defining a person in terms of that person's health takes about a terabyte of data. Now you take 7 billion people in the world, and you've got a terabyte of data that is changing, some of it changing by the minute. Others, for example, your genome may not change in 10 years, but there's a huge amount of data moving around, and this is personal data, so you've already covered the issue of encryption, but there's an awful lot of it, and most of it has to be wireless. So I would hope that these issues are added to the objectives of the group.
No, I think it's great input. We're still addressing the whole critical concept, by the way, and what's included in that. In fact, we had a pre-meeting today where we appointed 2 quarterbacks as we move forward, because it is an important game, and we need 2 quarterbacks. We need a deep bench, seriously. So Marvin's one of those, and we're still looking for a number 2 quarterback, or I should say his peer quarterback. On the video, or on the healthcare piece, or the video is everything, I think one of the key points we're trying to drive, and you have a very valid point, video is what we see as a big chunk of internet traffic. And even in healthcare, I think video is going to be a large piece of that. So we will try to take into account additional context around healthcare, though, in terms of what that means and generates. And I agree on the genome piece. The amount of data that's generated is massive. So thank you for your input. And I didn't even say that thing to invite you.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Let me just add just one word. Another category that I think is going to be equally important and also critical is education. So I
agree.
Greg.
Maybe this should be directed to John, since this was in your presentation. Maybe, and perhaps I can bring something else together. If you're predicting that by 2025, we'll have 426.1 exabytes of data going over wireless internet, do you have a calculation to tell me how much spectrum I have to free up by making my receivers better?
We were just trying to see if the growth continues as is, at that same rate, where do the numbers take you? And that's what that represented.
So if that's just an extrapolation, is it also possible that as the wireless becomes less fast or less accessible than fiber, for instance, because there's just not as much of it, that people will tend to gravitate toward the wired or the fiber just because it works better?
You will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of if you project the demand, you say, can that demand be met? I think the answer is yes. There are a lot of technologies that we're looking at here that will dramatically improve the spectral efficiency, a whole host of them. The massive MIMO is one that has a particularly high multiplier associated with it. That alone, probably not enough. But at the end, it's spectral reuse that's going to drive the highest numbers. So what that means is you're driving fiber very close to the endpoints and having much smaller cells and access points and things like that. So much more numerous endpoints. So in a way, you're right, it's fiber, but it's unlikely to be fiber all the way. It's going to be fiber really close.
Yeah, and I think that was the point we were trying to make, is that as you have more and more devices out there, you're having to drive that fiber deeper to support all those different devices that are out there, managing that capacity.
Thanks.
Same is true for copper as well. Copper's not completely going away.
Kevin, did you also have a... No, okay.
No, that was...
I think David told next.
Okay, David.
So I noticed the prominence of QoS, and that's been a very thorny issue with, to be honest, not very satisfying results after 30-plus years of research. So I'm not saying you shouldn't continue on the path you're on. I'd like to suggest that in addition, you look to see what, or try to sort of fire up a second fork path that would be, what's the minimum required? Where are the key pinch points? You're correct that congestion can occur everywhere, but it tends to occur in a few places. And my guess is that there are probably a few key pinch points that, if well addressed, would give people most of the QoE that they need. It may not give people the QoS that you're looking for. So, in the true internet spirit, it would be look for the simplest, minimalist thing and try to get a subgroup of folks that are looking to see what that might be.
So we also we agree with the point there. We think there's probably one area, and we had this, the tail of the dog and the dog, and the focus seems to be at least on, the majority of congestion is probably happening or maybe happening in the bias. Whether that's long-term or not, that may be an area to focus. But we do appreciate you volunteering to quarterback that subgroup.
What he said.
If I can respond, there's a reason that the slide says, is there a requirement for QoS? And if so, what are the drivers? And we still are treating it as an open question.
Could we redistribute the latest presentation? I'm not sure I saw the original version. I know some people got it, but whatever was presented today, could you send back out to the TAC for this group?
It was sent out.
It was sent out.
Okay.
I'll get you a copy if you don't have it.
All right, thanks. It may it's probably just my inbox.
You can get it off the website shortly after 4 o'clock today.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments, hopefully brief ones, from those on the call-in?
Yeah, this is Scott. I have two questions. One on QoS. The slide mentioned the possibility of technical barriers and/or business barriers to inter-domain QoS. Wondering if the work groups had a chance to think about what those technical barriers may be. And a second question on CDNs. You mentioned vertical integration between CDNs and bias service. And again, wondering if the work groups had a chance to talk more about what those might be.
We've looked at both those. On the QoS piece, on the technical aspect, there's really not an agreed upon way to hand that off. Each, as it was mentioned, each service provider, operator, or party sets their own QoS, and they get lost at the border, or at the handoff. So there would have to be some agreed on notion of how you would hand that, or at least the sort of defined parameters of how you treat that traffic off. And it becomes almost you look at it from a large perspective of large companies doing it. You can do one by so many, but then doing n by n squared for n being a large number becomes extremely difficult. So technically, we did have this a little bit on a philosophical question. We thought technically it's feasible. The business model really is sort of the driving force. What would be the value of doing that for some? Because you're talking about the big internet here. It's the non-specialized service piece of the network. So why would I guarantee certain bandwidth on my chunk of the network for something that I can't really or may not be able to get benefit out of?
Right. I think time-wise we need to transition. So, Mark, why don't you take it away on the future of unlicensed service?
Okay. On a second. Okay, here. All right. Slides on the roadmap to future of unlicensed. There we go. All right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. On the. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Okay. There's the group members. The chair, co-chair, myself, Mark Bayless, and Milan Budakak, and John Brahill's co-chair, Michael Ha, and then we have Karen Rakely, which isn't mentioned on that particular slide. Let me go to the next. Okay, there we go. All right. Get this. All right. Okay. The unlicensed services have played an unexpected and vital role in the evolution of communications. The capability in providing the wireless commons for innovation is critical. Important for the Commission to understand both the potential pathways for continued evolution of unlicensed services as well as the potential threats to continue the viability of the commons. The primary use for unlicensed spectrum has become one of the primary methods of basically internet-connected devices. Yet unlicensed spectrum also supports remote controls, thousands of other devices such as baby monitors, cordless phones. So it's a fairly complex issue. Okay. And okay, we've got 5 areas of focus that were for the group for the year, and it's recognize evolving and novel applications such as low power WANs, Internet of Things, unlicensed LTE. Second is new business models, managed, unmanaged, private, indoor only services. New candidates for spectrum bands to increase the availability of spectrum to keep up with the demand. Voluntary etiquettes for unlicensed service applications that will help protect this commons model. And the potential impact for present EMC limits for consumer and industrial devices on the continued growth and vibrance of unlicensed services. Okay, and this chart shows the importance of that unlicensed has become to mobile data services. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. This chart. Okay, and what we're seeing here is the increased use. If you look at the IP traffic growth, Wi-Fi, just talking on the Wi-Fi part of it, to the economy is estimated at 62 billion annual in incremental sales in devices. The amount of devices that are currently being produced now outnumber the Wi-Fi devices now outnumber the number of
licensed and licensed devices with Wi-Fi included. There's now the wireless devices by themselves. And as IoT continues to expand, that will dramatically increase. The mobile traffic offload is a very high value in the consumer case. 57% of mobile data is offloaded in 2014. So that's the majority of mobile data that people using their devices are actually offloaded using unlicensed spectrum. And that's growth is in 2004, by 2019 will be 66%. So that's a huge impact. 33% in 2014 was the total proportion of IP traffic accessed by Wi-Fi, and that's from the total traffic there, wired and wireless. And then 48% in 2019. So that's a dramatic growth. That also fits with the other pie charts that we've seen with other people presenting as the growth. Okay. And then the key usage of unlicensed spectrum has created a new environment of low-cost consumer devices. And this low cost in incorporating unlicensed into devices has led to this projection that we're seeing of predicted 30 billion expected IoT devices, which a majority of those will be using unlicensed spectrum. We'll also be seeing unlicensed spectrum is helping to enable innovation, developing a major of mobile internet and connected devices. The key, and as we've seen, the key uses in cases are cellular offload to Wi-Fi, residential Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi internet services, wireless personal area networks, Bluetooth, or other RFID, medical PANs, cordless phones, remote controls, and the bandwidth and throughput increase through policy actions and emergency technologies. So we're looking at current things on the agenda is more spectrum allocation, TV white space, spectrum sharing, MIMO, beamforming, LTE, millimeter wave. Now, this chart shows the phenomenal growth of unlicensed devices, and it also shows it in comparison to the rules and standards as it changed. And as you can see, the dramatic increase as we start moving from 1999, as we start looking at the standards put in for both Bluetooth, 802.11b, 802.11a, and then the expanding the permit of OFDM. And then this is the spectrum available for unlicensed broadband under 6 gigahertz. The TV white space from 0 to 150 in proceedings, the 902 to 928, the 204 to 2483, the 3.5 to 3.7, and the 5 gigahertz is, which has the largest current chunk, and then the proposed in the pipeline of the 53 to 50, 54.7 to 58, 50 to 59.25. Okay. And then this is what our group, their third quarter objective is to, we're going to engage the given industry to obtain input for possible future recommendations. We're going to have meetings with unlicensed spectrum equipment manufacturers and spectrum groups and organizations. We've reached out and put a list together of given groups, but we're offering input if anybody wants to come in. But there's a new item that we want to talk about that we're looking for support from TAC members. Okay, looking for support from the TAC members. And that is to assess the issue of noise environment and the impact on spectrum usage. And that fits in what Peter might be a good person to volunteer on that. Yes. And on that, we want to assess the state of the noise environment and review the current rules for intentional and unintentional radiators on that. And we'd like to ask groups such as NAB or other ones to contribute into this. Some of the like unintentional radiators, like a lot of people are seeing like CF light bulbs, light tubes, fluorescent lights, and the effect on unlicensed LTE. That people are seeing all those particular things. So that's my plea for help from the TAC for anyone else who wants to join in on this. So, Okay. And then here are the groups of questions that we have for sample questions for engagement. We'd be looking at if there's anything that we look like there's some question that anybody would think that we should add to this, please let me know. And one of the first ones we're going to do is application and services, both new and future. What do you expect drive demand of the future of unlicensed spectrum? And we're going to be asking that to equipment manufacturers, people who are doing things in the space, the Wi-Fi forum, some of the other ones. And any quantifiable projections on potential of these application services. And the second, are you aware of any data projections and relative growth, such as wide or better understanding of future unlicensed spectrum needs? And we've included these lists of these questions. Let me just go on down to the next slide. And we've included it in this PowerPoint so that people in the industry can look at this, and then they can contact us back, and send us information or say that they want to participate in this. We'd like to get as much input from manufacturers and groups as possible. Coming back in. And hopefully I've sped through this close enough. Okay. Yeah, I've sped through this close enough, fast enough to get us back on track. Yeah.
It couldn't be quite that fast, but,
okay.
But I thank you for your efforts. Are there questions or comments? Okay, well.
I just want to re-amplify. We were approached, FCC was approached by members of the National Association of Broadcasters who had a specific interest in terms of looking at noise issues related to unlicensed devices. Under Part 15, we specify emission limits not only for intentional radiating devices, but unintentional devices and incidental radiators. If we were going to pursue that within the TAC, I think there's specific skills required that we currently don't have. We would be interested in doing this. It's a topic that's of interest to the Commission, but it requires that some of the TAC members look inside their company if they're interested in this and get people skilled in this specific area. So we don't have to solve this now, but if there's an interest in doing this, we need people to come back to us and identify specific resources that they contribute to a subgroup within the unlicensed work group.
Pierre.
Yeah, just to follow on that point, Walt and Mark, Silicon Flatirons, as some of you may know, had a conference on noise in November 2013. I don't think much has changed since then, though I speak under correction. The big issue, as I recall then, was there is no data. We did a literature review. There's very little out there. The data that does exist tends to be in UHF, tends to be low UHF. So actually, I think the binding constraint is not people for a change. It's actually money to go and do measurements. Kevin.
Yeah, just a quick comment that you're looking at some of the questions here. I think some good input would come from last year's IoT work, where there were the team that Russ led. We had developed some projections to kind of figure out what were the fat rabbits, if you will, of the users, and so at least from the IoT perspective, that's a source to draw from.
The target from.
Yeah.
Target. Okay.
Great.
One of the key parts of Part 15 and unlicensed is the stipulation that you read on every device must not interfere with other things and must accept interference from other things. Do you foresee that unlicensed can grow keeping that stipulation?
Karen would be the key, because she's our liaison, which is the Part 15 person from the FCC. She would be the best one to answer that. But actually, if we would have been sitting here 5 years ago and making a projection that the unlicensed spectrum with little or no controls, just the industry coming up with their own mitigation to deal with this, to the amount of billions of devices that are operating, we probably wouldn't have expected to work. And yet, they're necessity finds solutions. And that's one of the interesting things about unlicensed spectrum, is led to so much development in order to solve problems that license frequencies didn't have to deal with. And it's led to great innovation. Now, whether that will continue as this massive growth goes, whether there will need to be any type of difference in anything, that's hopefully what we hope to find out.
Thank
you. Yeah.
Julie gets the last question, comment.
Yeah, just to amplify a little bit on what Walter said. Part of the reason we put this here, we've had these Part 15 general emissions limits for a very long time, and sometimes when we'll say, hey, they've worked well, other people will say, yeah, but the noise floor is going up and so forth. So this wasn't so much generally about the noise floor as any thoughts from the industry on they're fine, just leave them the way they are, or are there specific new things that came up on the horizon that people are experiencing problems with that we ought to be doing something about? You know, there are products that are incidental radiators, and one of the things we're seeing is with the services have gotten more and more sensitive. So we get anecdotal reports about, gee, I put this in here, and all of a sudden I saw an interference problem I didn't expect to have. Are those the canaries in the coal mine, or are they just ad hoc incidents? So, and we can help steer you to some folks to talk to along the way, and for all of the participants in the TAC, if you have thoughts on this, gee, because you hear it in the back rooms, so it's like, gee, I'm having all sorts of problems with X, and for us, we're trying to determine, is this something that's incidental, or is it something that we really ought to be focusing on?
I'm going to apologize to Greg. I think we're going to have to keep going for right now because we're now 10 minutes behind, so if that's okay. No. Go ahead, Russ.
I was just going to add, I think it's a very important topic, and one of the things we could take a look at is some of the work we did on the IoT team last year. We identified some of these potential issues or areas around the congestion or the reuse of the spectrum and Wi-Fi. And I think it also goes to the comment earlier around what we're going to have to do for next generation internet, because you're going to see Wi-Fi and wireless together be the feeder in a lot of cases, but it's still, as John called it, a fiber world.
Okay, very good. And I do apologize to those who have additional comments, but we do need to conclude in a timely way. And now we have our Form 477 report. And Steve, my apologies for not getting you sitting over here. I had heard that Chelsea was going to do the presentations, but yeah, no, I know, but you're the man. So
can we get the slides?
Okay. Yeah, I'll go faster. So there actually hasn't really been all that much work done to date, but the reason for having a presentation and talking about it is I want to propose an additional work item. But the first, an update. Some of this work has actually been gaining some results. Recommendations from last year are expected to appear in the next filing window, at least some of them. Streamlined upload process, comprehensive filing, summary, and receipt were all things which came through and which should be available in the next window. So it's encouraging to hear that that work is being adopted and should be making a difference for all of us. On the downside, funding for the client-side applications not been approved. So that's sort of led to a little bit of a lack of attention to things that would drive our work program. So we expect that to be approved in next year, but the client-side application would ease the process of compiling data. It should actually get more data from each of us, but then process it locally and then allow it to come back to the FCC. And in addition, it would support additional reporting variables. So why is any of this important? Well, our work program was to be looking at this and testing it, talking about applications, And we reduced it a little bit at the beginning when we knew that we didn't have funding right away to let's just look at the requirements and make recommendations on what should be collected. I want to propose that that we actually do something this year and spend a little time developing maps and charts to highlight the need for more detailed data collection and maps. I believe that I can produce some of these things myself, but I would want to have other TAC members come in and review that and check it out and make sure that it's agreed upon so that it could become an official TAC recommendation, which would support the gathering of additional data and hopefully even improve the chances for getting funding for these new data collection methods. I think this is important. I mean, I think that we have been talking about it in many ways about universal service, and unless you're collecting that data, you don't really get universal service. You don't even know who you're not serving. And right now, I don't think things are detailed enough to actually be able to say that.
Inaccuracies in that data?
There are two things. One is that I don't think that necessarily everybody who's in a block that is counted as covered, that most households in that block actually are covered. And the second is even within a block that might be covered, say, 19 out of 20 households, there's still that one guy who's sitting there and can't get service. And that means he can't get DSL service, he can't get cable modem service, and so he's out getting service from a WISP, he's out getting service from a geo satellite, and you know, quite honestly, the services cost a bit more. So it drives to that affordability question. And as things are coming up for CAF2 and all of that, I think that better data will matter.
We're thinking that we can change the questions of the 477 form to kind of be more precise and lead to a more accurate result. Is that kind of what you're thinking at the outset, but you want to maybe test that, or through some of what you were saying of creating some of the maps on your own, or?
Well, I know where my customers are, and I think that other people know where their customers are, and I think that we might be able to come up with a way to identify that. I mean, I know, for example, that my customers cluster around the edges of suburban areas, and a lot of those areas show up in the broadband map as covered. And it seems a little odd that the highest concentration should be in areas that are covered.
Okay.
And good offer, and thank you, Steve. We're in the wrap-up, so Julie, any words of wisdom?
No, so we can finish on time.
Very wise.
Walt, comments from you.
On these two last issues, I'll be sending around a note to all of you asking for solicitation and views. And if you want to participate, just let me know.
Okay, very good. Just a couple of quick points. We did introduce Lisa, and thank you for being here and part of us for first meeting. And Jeff, we thank you for coming back, even though you didn't really get very far away, but good to have you here. I do want to take note of the fact and to recognize Peter Bloom, who in fact has been a part of us. Peter's been impacted by some of his other activities to the degree that he has decided that he can no longer really effectively serve, so we're a tear in the eye that we're losing Peter Bloom, but we do appreciate his service while he's been here.
Actually, activities, not just not his day job, but activities working for other activities within the federal government.
Yeah, being pulled. Do want to highlight our need for actionable recommendations. Those have been highlighted throughout, but I would like to correct one point from Paul earlier. Paul pointed out that he's looking for actionable recommendations on what the FCC should do, and it is more than just what the FCC should do. It is also what we can all collectively do, so I'll remind you all of that, and I know that Paul knows that too. I do want to compliment Dale on his enhancement on actionable recommendations to immediate specific actions. I thought that was really an enhancement. We may have to move from actionable recommendations to immediate specific actions. That really is impressive.
What did I do?
The ISAs, you know. Finally, I'd like to point out on this general topic area that we don't have to wait until the end of the year. Most of the suggestions in the presentations were, and by the end of the year we'll have actionable recommendations around this or that or the other. Well, you don't have to wait. I mean, if you have actionable recommendations for September, and by the way, September 24th is our next meeting as a reminder, but please don't wait. Finally, I will appreciate your feedback if you want to drop an email. This is our first attempt at long and short presentations. Long presentations in some cases were a little short, and short presentations were a little long, but it was our experiments work like that. I'm a researcher. So I do appreciate the work that was done around getting to that point, but more globally, I'd appreciate your thoughts on this being an appropriate way to deal with the large number of subjects that we're addressing. Finally, as I very often do, I would like to thank, and I was going to name you individually, but I think for interest of time, I will just thank you generically for the chairs of the various groups. I really do appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the shepherdship of the members of the FCC who are very actively involved and serve as active contributors and provide guidance.
And one other, this year more than any other, there's a number of sub-work groups that have been formed, and people have stepped up to chairing those sub-work groups, and we'd like to thank them also.
No, absolutely. And I was kind of going there anyway, but thank you for the interjection. It really goes for the whole group. We keep stepping up our game, and I really do send kudos around. We noted the fact that this is, I believe, the largest meeting in terms of number of attendees that we've ever had, but that bespeaks the point that there is more work going on than I think has ever gone on either, and we've had some pretty good years in the last few years. So stepping it up even beyond past performance is something very impressive. So thank you one and all for all your contributions in moving things forward. Russ?
Micro USB cable, it was on the table down there, and they moved all the nameplates, so somebody's not going to want to lose this.
All right, very good. And with that, unless someone has any other major announcements like Russ's, I'd like to call this meeting concluded, and thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great.